So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1, what if Naruto trained with Super Saiyan Broly? But before I start, don't forget to use the 1000 year of death on like and subscribe button. And for the next part, do check out the description box and also check out my playlist. Now let's start the story. Unimaginable pain. It forced him to crawl like some pathetic bug that just wasn't squished properly. Come to think of it, crawling was too noble to describe the way he dragged his crippled body to the pod he had miraculously discovered. And all this was because of that final blow from that blasted Kakarot. Broly growled as he forced the thought away from him. He needed all of his concentration to get to his pod now, he'll have time to hate Kakarot later. Moments later, just as Comet Komori was about to hit new planet Vegeta, the injured Saiyan managed to climb inside his saving grace and punch the launch button. Whatever coordinates had been saved in the computer's memory banks will just have to do. The pod lifted off the surface of the world and shot off in a random direction, just as new planet Vegeta met its demise. In another time, the pod avoids any debris and makes its escape without a hitch, but not here. The Saiyan felt a massive jolt as a piece of the planet hit his ship and caused several alarms to go off. Warning. Came the feminine voice of the navigation systems. Hull damage severe and leaking fuel. Adjusting course for nearest planet. Broly, not conscious enough to care and with a slowly developing migraine from the alarms, could not have been more thankful when the hyper-sleep functions of the pod activated. Warning, warning. The blood-stained man was violently shaken awake as his ship seemingly hit a massive wall of turbulence. Hull damage severe. Catastrophic failure imminent. Broly braced himself using the armrests of his chair as the pod shook intensely once again. The agony from his partially healed wound shocked him to a fully awakened state. If he had to guess, something important had just broken off. But the last jerk that gave the Saiyan some whiplash, the power systems failed. Now that his mind was in full working order, it was only then did the self-proclaimed devil notice just how warm his cabin had become. The glass in front of him cracked. Just my luck. Growled the Saiyan just as he lifted his arms to block his face. The window imploded and showered his body with glass before the ship itself fell apart. From below, an elderly man with violet-ringed eyes witnessed the strange spectacle in the sky. The shining meteor had split into pieces and was promptly consumed by flames, but from the seeming destruction of the celestial object, he bore witness to a strange, but clearly human, shape falling to the earth. Hagoromo, intrigued by this twist, grabbed his Shikujo and flew over to where he estimated the person would crash. The impact site was a 10-foot crater in the middle of a nondescript forest that was a little less than half as deep. In the center, with skin scorched and clothes blackened, lay a block of muscle that resembled a man appearing no more older than in his mid-30s with a grievous hole in his abdomen. It was with a hesitant curiosity that he noted the area was bathed in an ethereal glow that emanated from the bloody figure. His base instincts told him to keep his distance, since anything that could survive a fall from that height and still create such a display must be powerful, but his principles would not allow him to let something like that go unhealed. So he compromised. The sage landed next to the emerald-haired man with a soft TCK and promptly kneeled by him. Hagoromo put a hand encased in green chakra onto the injury. It was mere moments before the wound was healed enough to not be of immediate danger, but it was still crippling. Compromise. Hagoromo took his hand away and looked over the young man once more. He wore golden boots, wristbands, and a belt that were all embedded with blue jewels. The rest of his attire consisted of white pants and a red sash. Is he royalty? Thought the sage as he began to feel for the stranger's power. His earlier conclusion was proven correct, since the air around his body was saturated by something that was not chakra. It's Kai. He noted with surprise. Kai users were extremely rare in this world and were well known for their hellish ability to unleash massive waves of pure destruction, as well as outstanding feats such as flight. Unfortunately, or fortunately depending on one's perspective, he figured, most Kai wielders were brutish and overconfident due to their seemingly unparalleled power. Only the wise few survived past their first battles and, as a result, their numbers and those willing to learn such techniques dwindled by the day. The groan brought his attention back to the man in the crater. Akaka, the man's body tensed and a gargantuan wave of power burst from his body, increasing the size of the crater tenfold in an instant. A quick use of a Shinra Tensei on Hagoromo's part was able to cancel out the section of the shock wave that would have sent him flying away. Kakarot. I believe I have made a grave error, thought the sage, as he floated to what he believed to be a safe distance from the most likely very dangerous man. With white-hot pain clearly evident across his face, the giant pushed himself onto his feet and then rose into the air until he was level with the elderly man. He looked around, obviously disoriented from his near-death experience, and his eyes landed on the only other living being nearby. Kakarot? Where is Kakarot? He thundered at the Rinnegan wielder through heavy breaths. The giant then hunched over slightly with a grunt before he put a hand to his abdomen and hissed from the contact. Hagoromo, mouth now a thin line, subtly tightened his grip on his Shikujo as he hardened his body with the Asura path. I am not aware of anyone by that name. His eyes drifted down to the stranger's wound. Your priority, however, should be the gaping cavity that now takes up most of your torso. The injured man snarled as his aura intensified, which blew away some loose rock on the ground below him. My priority is Kakarot. Now tell me where he is or I will destroy this miserable rock you call a planet. The sage gave the man a skeptical look. Destroy an entire planet? Impossible. Even he was incapable of such a feat though. It would be presumptuous to believe there is no one stronger than him living among the stars. He might be delusional, but it would be foolish to not consider the possibility he is capable of what he boasts. The god of shinobi concluded in his mind. The pupil-less stranger charged the old man with a roar, crossing the distance between them in an instant. Hagoromo's godly reflexes allowed him to barely dodge the blow, and he shifted away a fair distance away to avoid a follow-up attack. He reached up to his cheek to find that it had been warped by the force of the missed blow, though it was quickly returned to its original state. You're only prolonging your death, you worm. He shouted as he swung his right arm at the sage, releasing a head-sized ball of Kai in his direction. The attack seemed to simply pass through the Rinnegan user, though that was simply a clever use of a couple kamuis on the sage's part. The thunderclap of the explosion that occurred behind him though shook him deeply. He tilted his head slightly to get a view of the damage, and what he saw was simply incomprehensible. A crater, easily miles wide, rested where there were once hundreds of trees and most likely thousands of animals. The only ones he could think of that had a comparable level of power were his mother and the 10 tails. It was but a moment, but the distraction was long enough for Hagoromo to end up eating dirt with several broken ribs to boot. The punch would have ran right through him had it not been for his Asura path. The giant was on him in the blink of an eye with his arm already in mid-swing, but elder of the two had regained his wits in time to release a swift Shinra Tensei that held just enough power to push the fist away from the sage. Thinking quickly, Hagoromo willed the bottom end of his Shikujo to snap off and mold into a ball that slammed itself into his opponent's wound. The Kai wielder, wholly unprepared for the surprise counterattack, was thrown back several yards with a cry of pain. The truth-seeking ball pulled away from his now reopened wound and returned to the sage's Shikujo. The man writhed on the ground with an arm on his injury and bit back any more outcries of weakness. Lyle, he coughed up a sizable amount of blood. I'll kill you for that. Hagoromo straightened himself out and put up a strong front despite his broken ribs. The man was a brute from the looks of things, so a good bluff on his part may demoralize him. You're in no shape to make threats. My truth-seeking ball has aggravated your already critical condition. The elderly man willed half a dozen of the black spheres into existence in the air behind him to drive him his next point. I do not wish for you to die. The man wiped away the blood on his chin with a casual wipe of his hand as he rose to his feet in a smoother fashion than earlier. It was obvious to the sage, however, that the man was hiding the agony he felt. The subtle twitches here and there might as well have been a massive neon sign dictating so to one such as him. Do you really believe a weakling such as you can stand up to me? Broly, the legendary Super Saiyan. So that's his name, thought the elder of the two. You can't hide your pain from me, Broly. Stop now and end this pointless conflict peacefully, or I'll be forced to take more drastic measures. The Super Saiyan, as he identified himself as, charged him once again in a fit of rage, though at a noticeable slower pace than before. 5 of the truth-seeking balls rushed forward to meet him head-on, but instead of hitting flesh and bone, the balls were deflected away by a shield of Kai. The green-haired giant landed a hammer of a fist in Hagoromo's abdomen that caused his back to bulge out and the sage to cough out blood. A right uppercut hit his chin an instant later, knocking his brain around the inside of his skull, which was followed up by a knee to his stomach that bent him over. That one definitely added ruptured organs to his already broken ribs. The Saiyan ended his assault with an elbow to the elder's back that was accompanied by a loud cracking sound and sent him falling to the earth. To add insult to injury, along with more injury, Broly caught up to his falling body and slammed a boot into Hagoromo's back, which definitely broke something. The sage was too disoriented to even guess the extent of his injuries. Broly began to laugh as he seemingly gained the upper hand, but a sharp pain shot through his abdomen. He doubled over and wrapped his arms around his open wound. Never before had he felt this level of agony. Despite this, he had to go on. He could not, let this humiliation against him stand. The Rinnegan wielder groaned as the various broken bones and ruptured organs in his body began to heal. The kick to his back had definitely left his lower body paralyzed for the moment. 5 direct blows from his beast of an opponent was all it took to injure him to such an extent. Even Kagaya and the 10 tails had failed to hurt him so. He had to finish this now. Quickly spotting Broly, Hagoromo lifted a hand towards him and a black ball of chakra formed. It flew off and whizzed past the currently distracted Saiyan before it stopped a couple hundred feet above him. Planetary devastation. A bright white glow illuminated the scarred landscape once more. Cracks broke its surface for miles as mountain-sized chunks of earth were torn from the planet in an awesome display of the sage's power. Broly found himself being forcibly yanked upwards by a mysterious force. He looked upwards to where he was being dragged and saw a small sphere that was apparently gathering not just him, but everything that could be pulled free from the earth, even if that was the earth itself. The Super Saiyan resisted against the pull even, but the slabs of stone that broke against him pushed him closer and closer with every impact. Had he really been weakened to the point that simple boulders were capable of moving him? It became too much for the Emerald Giant, and he was slammed into the now sizable orb of rock and dirt with such force that a flash of white filled his vision. It was mere moments until he was buried under hundreds of tons of the planet's surface. Hagoromo stared at his new construct with a combination of relief and disappointment. The raw hatred and anger pouring from the man was near suffocating, but he could tell that he was warped to become this way. If one were to look closely enough like he did, they would see the sick amalgamation of negative emotions that swirled around in the man's head. Betrayal, loneliness, frustration, unfulfilled needs, and fear. All buried underneath the murderous rage he showed in the fight. Was Kakarot responsible for what he saw today? This insatiable wrath. This seemingly unburdened fury. It was clear that something had prevented the man from properly expressing his emotions until recently, where it was all released at once. His thoughts were interrupted when a colossal fissure appeared on the sphere that eclipsed most of the sky above. Two angry emerald orbs looked upon him from deep within the crack, and suddenly Hagoromo felt small. Helpless even. This was arguably his greatest attack, and this alien enemy endured it. Broly crawled out of the gaping scar with the last reserves of his strength. His hulking mass was reduced to that of a young, lanky man, and his still golden, spiked hair lacked the green tinge. The clothes and horrendous torso wound were the only things identifying him as the same being that crashed to the earth mere minutes before. The Super Saiyan looked to the planet and made eye contact with the Sage of Six Paths. He took a sick pleasure from seeing the utter shock that played across his enemy's face as he lifted an open palm towards him. "I will not stop," he gulped a lungful of air as everything within view took on a sickly green color that quickly condensed into the palm of the Saiyan's outstretched hand. "Until you and this planet are ashes among the stars." Broly roared from the inhuman effort of stabilizing his Omega Blaster before his golden hair suddenly became limp and the color of ravens. The ball of Kai then fizzled out and the man fell forward unconscious, with his lower half still stuck within the crevice he created. Hagoromo, realizing that his opponent was finally out for the count, let himself fall back and lay down on the cold, hard ground with a sigh of relief. The battle may have been brief, but he'll be damned if it wasn't intense. He gazed upon the corpse-like form of his opponent and the large ball that he failed to escape from. As it stood, he could not help the man. While the sage was sympathetic, it would take years, perhaps decades, before Broly could be healed mentally. Time he knew he did not have in this world. It was with a reluctant sigh that he decided that Kai Wielder had to be sealed away. Hagoromo might not be able to heal him, but hopefully a descendant of his will. Present time. Madara looked up at the sphere with his lone Sharingan, and a near overwhelming sense of awe flared up within him. The surface of the ball of rock looked almost alive as black shapes, symbols, and innumerable kanji crawled along with some randomly disappearing and reappearing like schools of fish diving to avoid invisible predators. He, along with Nagato's Diva Path, was standing at the bottom of the largest cavern the shinobi had ever seen. The ceiling was thousands of feet above their heads, and the actual room they were in was several miles wide. To add to that, nearly every surface in the cave had dozens of massive seals whose subtle glow waned and waxed with each passing moment. All to hide and contain one Saiyan, as the sage's tablet identified him. "The sage never ceases to amaze me," muttered the Diva Path as he looked over everything for any hints of writing left by the sage. His tablet, which revealed the location of this monumental prison, could only be deciphered by the Rinnegan, so it stands to reason that any important messages here would follow the same rules, but he saw nothing that stood out. The only sign that Madara even heard pain was a subtle nod in agreement as he too inspected the orb in front of him with his Mangekyo. The tablet stated that only a wielder of the Rinnegan can free this Broly from his prison, correct? Stated Madara as he continued to stare at the sphere. Yes. Well then, what are you waiting for? With a nod, Pain put a hand to the sphere as instructed in the tablet, and the reaction was instant. A multitude of differing seals gathered around his hand and proceeded to melt into a substance that appeared to be somewhere between a liquid and a gas. The material was so dark it was like that the dim light in the cavern was afraid to touch it. In the next few moments, it crawled up the Diva Path's arm and gathered around his eyes before the substance evaporated an instant later. A gentle hum permeated the air in the massive room as the rest of the seals on the orb peeled off and disappeared, while a potent shock wave burst forth from the stone monument. The Diva Path, unfazed by the display, made his way back to his leader's side, while Madara simply continued to watch like it was a rather interesting stage play, rather than the releasing of a supposedly planet-busting criminal. All of a sudden, the ball split apart into two large halves that fell away from each other, revealing a lanky, raven-haired man. He was slowly let down from his position in the air by some unseen force, but once he touched down, it seemed to let go, which caused him to stumble forward and fall to his knees and hands. He was just as described on the tablet in terms of attire as well as the three seals on him. One that encompassed his back, another over his heart, and a final on his forehead. Broly blinked the grogginess out of his eyes and groaned. It felt like he had been asleep for weeks, and his body simply forgot how to properly wake up. To think of it, how long was he out? The last thing he remembered was that blasted old man crushing him under who knows how many tons of the planet's surface. The Saiyan looked up to see two ridiculous-looking men in black cloaks with red clouds. One had orange hair, black piercings everywhere, and purple ringed eyes. The other wore an orange spiral mask, black hair, and one red eye with some strange markings in them. He moved his gaze from the two men to the environment where all he saw was stone with more strange markings. What the hell was going on? But he coughed several times, his throat was beyond dry. Clearing it with a few grunts, he continued. "Where am I?" he demanded from the two. When they didn't respond, he growled and pushed himself onto his feet. "If you don't answer my question." Almighty push. Broly felt an invisible wall of something slam into him and found himself on his back while a pounding pain racked his body. Now, no need for such roughness, pain," said the masked one as he made his way around Broly's body and stood by his head. "He's delicate right now," the masked man added with a chuckle, which earned him a severe glare from the recently freed Saiyan. "You'll be the first to die." Madara merely chuckled at the brashness of the Saiyan and stomped a foot on his chest as his Sharingan seemed to gain an ethereal glow to them. Broly, confusion running rampant through him as he appeared incapable of escaping from under the masked man's foot, looked up at the man to demand answers, but before he could get a word out, the seal on his forehead flashed white for an instant, and Broly's eyes took on a red hue, while they gained 3 Tomo. The lanky Saiyan stopped struggling. "Get up, Broly." The Saiyan did as the Uchiha commanded without hesitation or complaint. In Broly's mind. Broly looked around in a rarely displayed panic. He was in a massive poorly lit room that he had never seen before with 2 black monoliths to his sides. Chains combing these towering structures were wrapped around his body and constricted him in a manner not unlike a straitjacket. Manacles around his ankles and neck kept him rooted to the floor in a kneeling position. The only part of him capable of movement was his head and eyes. This isn't happening. He closed his eyes and attempted to calm his breathing. It was a nightmare, it had to be. He just gained his freedom from his father. Once he opened his eyes, he would still be sitting in the pod with that annoying nav computer. Broly's hopes were crushed in the next moment. "No." He screamed in despair as he tried to pull himself free by thrashing around as much as he could. It was to no avail. "I am sleeping in a pod. Half dead from that damned Kakarot. Not here." He pulled back against the restraint on his neck to the point that he felt something pop, but the chain refused to even make a sound in protest. "Get up, Broly." The Saiyan stopped his struggle and looked around as the booming voice reverberated throughout his noosed cage. Up in the air above him was a monitor-like apparition that he could only assume was the outside view from his eyes. It was the masked man. "Come on, Nagato, I must discuss a change of plans with you back in AIM. You're coming along too, Broly." This was his father and the crown all over again. His vision blurred, something small hit the floor of the most recent of his cages. Broly looked down and saw a small drop of a clear liquid. He'd never considered himself capable of tears. There were numerous possibilities for what they could encounter when the Hokage sent them out, this was not one of them. All around the squad of Anbu, writing looked as if it had been burned into every surface within the cavern and on the shattered sphere that took up residence in the center. The feat made more impressive by the fact that the gaping maw of earth they were standing in had an actual horizon. "Eel, stay by the entrance and let no one know. Hare, look for any additional entrances. Eagle, you and I are going to see what we can scrounge up before anyone else gets here." The 3 acknowledged him with a collective hi. Before Eel and Hare went off to do their jobs. Or, the squad leader, looked over the room and sighed internally, though nothing in his body language portrayed such thoughts. Their sensors had detected an intense burst of chakra, more of an explosion really, due to the scale of said event, and the Godim quickly dispatched them to investigate. It didn't help that it was in Kuni, which meant that it was a possibility that Kumo had detected the chakra as well. So this was supposed to be a quick in and out to gather some idea of what had happened here, but anything comprehensive was simply not going to be the case given what they were dealing with. "We must move quick. Kumo could be on us at any time." The two separated to what they believed would be the most relevant areas of study. Eagle went to a curiously worn-down path while Boar investigated a strange opening in the rocks. The Anbu captain did a cursory review of the immediate vicinity and noticed a pair of faint footprints. Nothing else that suggested that whoever those prints belonged to left. Nothing says they walked in either. He thought to himself as he noted that there was a suspicious lack of tracks in either direction from the entrance or otherwise. Boar moved forward and looked into the crevasse of the sphere. Beyond the entryway, the crack opened into an oddly defined hole. The inside was as smooth as glass, whereas the entry jagged like one would expect a cracked rock to be. Another thing to be noted. An hour passed where the Anbu captain along with Eagle investigated the scene with as scrutinous eye as possible before Eagle perked up from the entrance. Despite how involved he was with a particularly readable seal, the movement was noticed by Boar. The Anbu raised a fist and clicked his tongue which gained the attention of the rest of his squad. I'm detecting rapidly moving chakra signatures. A pause. 7 of them. I estimate them at 4 clicks out. Their behavior suggests we have not been detected. Boar nodded. Pack your things. We're leaving. 6 hours before. With a quick cameo, the 3 men were teleported to Payne's Tower, the self-proclaimed god's base of operations within the village of Omegakure. Surprised, Conan turned from the balcony that overlooked the village. She had expected them to take longer. The Angel of Aim looked the strange man that Payne and Madara brought with them over. While tall, he was smaller in stature than she expected. The strange gold jewelry on his wrists and naked chest didn't do much to help impressions. Did he really have the power claimed in the sage's tablet? Is this the new member you spoke of? She asked, wary of the stranger. She was nothing if not careful, and his capabilities weren't exactly the most well documented. Yes. Answered Madara as Nagato's diva path made his way to her side. The Uchiha shot him a glance that was almost appraising in nature. A simple-looking one, isn't he? She didn't dignify the offhand insult with a response and instead looked up at the man's dull expression. Surprisingly enough, once she overlooked the odd attire, Conan thought he looked rather normal. A welcome reprieve when considering the diversity of the organization's members. It was then that she noticed the peculiar look of his eyes. He was under Jinjutsu. I take it he wasn't interested in joining. I'm not taking chances with this one. A strong shinobi not joining us is an acceptable loss, he isn't. Madara made a gesture to Payne and the man walked over to Broly who knelt down. The diva path put its hand to the man's back and the seal glue upon contact. Its edges snailed outwards ever so slightly, but with the movement of the ink, the pressure in the room grew. The color of the Saiyan's skin brightened not unlike a corpse returning to life, and he took a large breath. Broly looked around his new prison in a daze, his near catatonic state broken by a shift in the room's light. His glow of his chains shifted, just slightly, to a familiar emerald, and it was like finding a warm refuge in a blizzard. He felt some of his strength return. The raven-haired man turned his head, neck aching from a lack of movement, and he inspected his arms. The chains around them were lit by a ghostly flame, and that's when he knew that it was his essence returning to him. He didn't know what is happening, but there was no point in wasting time questioning it. The Saiyan pushed himself forward with all of his regained might. He didn't know how long it would last, but his gut told him it wasn't going to be long. The empty void was filled with his roar of exertion as the chain grew taut from the force pulling on it. Dust flew off the pillars as Broly shifted directions and threw himself backward. It was painful, but the raven-haired man forced his feet under him. With a gargantuan effort, he propelled himself against his bindings. The metal of his restraints ground into his skin like thick knives. It was enough to make most men crumble. Come on, come on, come on. Sweat poured down Broly's face like rain, his bestial growls erupted into a final scream of fury, fear, and loathing before the green disappeared. But the flow of power cut off, he fell back exhausted. His lungs ached, each breath felt like the gasp one would take after nearly drowning. His heart hammered away at his chest. The Saiyan let his head fall with grit teeth, they were toying with him. Letting him have hope where there was none to be found. That doesn't feel like chakra. Broly looked up once again, his soaked hair stuck to his face. There was a third one. It was a woman this time, but she wore the same uniform as the other 2. So this was some little club. They were all looking down at him. Like he was just their slave. The one with the red eyes. It wasn't hard to see that he was the one pulling the strings. Once he was free, he would rip the man's eyes from his head and grind the rest of them into paste. He will take his time cleansing this world and its history from the face of the galaxy. When everything was gone, only then would he be satisfied. That's enough. The orange-haired shinobi lifted his hand and the seal returned to its dormant state. The Uchiha couldn't help but feel pleased. I've never felt power like this before. The energy in the air could be tasted and it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Conan focused on the stranger with an intensity she usually reserved for combat. That doesn't feel like chakra. Payne spoke up. It's Kai. A form of life force manipulation from the time of the warring clans. Hi. The Kunoichi furrowed her brow. I vaguely remember reading about that when we were younger. It was mentioned in the occasional history book. She refocused her sharp gaze at the brainwashed man as he stood up. Of course, like most things from the era, anything substantial about it has been lost to time. Though I do know that Kai has the distinct advantage of not being chakra, so how are you controlling him? Curious, aren't you? Though I suppose there's no harm in letting you know. Madara pointed at his own forehead. The seal on his head changes chakra applied to it into Kai. It's not a perfect one-to-one conversion, so he paused as he looked for the right word. Quirks are to be expected. It's because of this that I'm able to wield him like you see before you. The Uchiha went and put a hand on the Saiyan's shoulder. Now, if you'll excuse me, we'll just be a bit. As quickly as the shinobi first appeared, he disappeared in the shadow of a Kamui. The moment of silence passed before Conan looked at Pain. I know you want to say something. We're so close, Conan. The path glanced at Conan with a hint of something akin to content in its eyes. She gazed at him in mild confusion. What do you mean? The tailed beasts are no longer needed, we have the ultimate weapon we had been seeking to create. Nagato's avatar looked out at the view overlooking their village. The world will finally know true pain. Conan was surprised to say the least. She was so focused on her suspicions that she neglected to think on what would happen if Broly lived up to expectations. The man was supposed to be able to reap entire worlds. A hidden village every now and then. Almost pitifully easy in the face of such overwhelming power. She gave him a rare, albeit small, smile. Soon all the misery they had gone through in their lives would be worth it. Yes, it will. Despite satisfaction from a successful mission, Tsunade read the report from the Anbu with a furrowed brow. None of it seemed to make any sense. There was nothing in any known record of a cavern this size existing anywhere, yet there it was. Add on to that all of the cryptic seals everywhere, and the evidence of flora that had gone extinct hundreds of years ago, and the Hidden Leaf village had quite the conundrum on its hands. The puzzle that only yielded more questions once a possible solution was noted in a passage near the end of the report. Upon investigating the fissure, it was discovered that an impression was made near the center of the sphere. It was humanoid in shape from a cursory review, though due to time constraints, further investigation was not done to determine whether or not this was the case. So it was possible this whole thing was a prison. For one inmate. It made some sense. They knew that sealing living beings away was a thing, Jinchuricus were a thing after all. This could have been the same thing on a mind-numbingly large scale. But how someone could have hidden such a thing from everyone for, potentially, centuries. And in such a large space. Not to mention what had warranted such extreme measures to keep something under such lock and key. Then there was the question of where the hell did this prisoner go? The only evidence that there was anyone else in the cavern before her Anbu were two sets of footprints right in front of the crack in the sphere. Nothing that showed someone entering or leaving. She looked up from the papers at her fellow Sannin. So what do you make of this, Jiraiya? Other than the obvious. Tsunade scowled and the toad sage nervously cleared his throat. All I can say is that I can't read the majority of the seals, and the ones I can read are extremely complex. The spy master put a hand through his wild white hair. It would take me years to get anything close to this scale done. Well, at least we don't have to worry about a super gifted seal user then. Everything points to this being created centuries ago. The Hokage sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. It was too early for something so complicated. Wait. She glanced out the corner of her eye. It was getting dark already. Still, if it took someone of this caliber, Jiraiya gestured to the pictures of the cave's walls. What does that say of what they spent all this effort containing? Nothing good to say the least. The Hokage decided they had spent enough time on the matter that day already. She had been studying it for hours before Jiraiya had even stepped foot in the village. So how's Naruto? The toad sage perked up. Not the most subtle way to change a subject, but I commend the effort. Shut the hell up and answer me. Jiraiya snickered at how easily he riled up his former teammate. The blonde brat has been bouncing all over the place out of excitement. He's really missed the village. The clearing near Shimagakure. The Kamui opened up and disappeared in an instant, leaving behind the two men. Madara breathed in the cool, crisp air of the snowy tundra around him. The village nearby was small, isolated, and with minimal forces. This was the perfect location for a quick test. This is Shimo. Started the Uchiha. While speaking had no practical applications in the moment, he knew that his subject was listening. A rather pathetic excuse for a hidden village in the land of frost. Prove to me you are worth keeping around by destroying it. Broly lifted his arm, his palm pointed at the village. Everything around the two suddenly turned a deep green, and the masked shinobi felt a subtle shock go through his system. The emerald around them collapsed as a light as intense as the sun grew in the palm of the Saiyan's hand. Without warning, the orb of Kai blasted away. The force of the blast leaving his hand created a gale force wind that buffeted them and the environment without mercy. Snow beneath the attack was vaporized instantaneously. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of lives were lost in a symphony of blinding light and burning sound. The dome of the explosion devoured every inch of the village like a starved animal. The Uchiha had to lift a hand to block the radiant sight from hurting his eyes. A shock wave passed over Madara and Broly and lifted the former's robes, though he paid no mind to it. It was over in the snap of a finger. The Uchiha scanned the small plane of glass that used to be Shimagakure, and he found himself chuckling. So many paths to take with this power. There was something to be said of how absolute the destruction was. No rubble. No corpses. Just nothing. Before anything could be done with the Saiyan, however, there was the question of properly controlling this weapon of his. His grasp on the alien's mind was merely good at best and tenuous at its worst. Were something to happen during a battle that could affect the link he had with Broly, the monster may fall out of his grasp. And there goes the planet. Of course, the sage thought of such a possibility and put a kill switch on the raven-haired man's chest. A simple touch of the seal from a Rinnegan wielder and all of his power would be instantly locked away. There were two issues with such an arrangement. The first was that there was no guarantee that they could activate it in time. Secondly, and more importantly, he did not have the Rinnegan, and the one man that did would look at Broly as the answer to his prayers. Nagato believed that they were gathering the tailed beasts to make the ultimate weapon. An objective made pointless by the appearance of the Saiyan. What was to stop Akatsuki's figurehead from making the logical assumption that Broly was a suitable replacement? That just wouldn't do. The tailed beasts were vital to the Eye of the Moon plan, which used a genjutsu which wouldn't work with Kai. Unless he can convince Nagato to continue with gathering the Biju, he'd have to harvest Nagato's eyes far earlier than anticipated. Conan won't like that, so he'd have to eliminate her as well. "You're both a blessing and a curse, my puppet," he muttered as the alien put his hand down. A ray of sunshine brought some warmth to his mask, and the Uchiha looked up. The sky above them had been forced open to make way for the mushroom cloud that had bloomed in the moments following the massacre Broly had just committed. A blessing and a curse. 3 days later. Sasori and Deidara watched with bored expressions as the boulder slid away to let them in. The clay construct shifted in place and shook off some of the sand that had fallen off the Kazukija's body onto its tail. The duo had successfully kidnapped the one-tailed Jinchuriki not too long ago. It was a relatively easy mission given that the only casualty was the bomber's arm. The opening revealed a man standing in the center of the room where their ritual was supposed to take place. He wore their uniform, a black cloak with red clouds, but they had never seen him before today. Even stranger still was the slashed headband from Amegakure, the same village that Pain hailed from. The duo were instantly on high alert at the intruder, but confusion replaced their nerves once they saw the shadowy form of their leader's hologram. "You're late. Prepare it immediately." Deidara, with a wary eye on the new guy, unceremoniously dumped Gaara's body on the ground. "The Jinchuriki was stronger than I thought, yeah." Pain put his hands together before slamming a palm onto the ground for a summoning jutsu. A massive plume of smoke filled the room, and the Jito statue, a sculpture of an alien-looking creature with 9 eyes, appeared before them. "Right." The leader of Akatsuki spoke with no inflection of any kind in his voice. "Assemble." He joined his hands once more. The shadowy forms of the rest of the Akatsuki appeared on each individual fingertip of the statue. Deidara and Sasori quickly jumped up to join them with a mysterious guest staying put. "From this point forward, it'll take 3 days and nights to complete. Everyone, also be mindful of your real bodies. Zetsu, use your real body as a lookout. Use your largest range." The plant-man hybrid shifted in his spot. "I know. 3 days, eh? With Orochimaru gone, shouldn't we expect it to take longer? If you really think so, then let's get started already." The group of missing nin lifted their hands and began channeling chakra to the Jito statue. A smoky cloud of chakra gathered in the mouth of the grotesque monument. Sealing jutsu. 9 phantom dragons. The great coiling bodies of 9 ghostly dragons slithered out of the Jito statue's mouth. To say the constructs looked predatory was an understatement. They locked onto the still body of Suna's Kazekage and crashed into him with great force. The red life force of the tailed beast within him was pulled from his body in waves. It was a small blessing that the young man was unconscious for the ritual. Days passed without incident, but in the final hours of the extraction, Zetsu discovered the presence of a squad of leaf ninja. "An enemy from Konoha is approaching our hideout. He appears to be very skilled. His name is Might Guy." One of the Akatsuki phantoms, unfamiliar with the ninja, spoke up. "Who's that?" Another answered him. "He's a jonin from the leaf village who uses taijutsu. He's quite talented, so take care not to underestimate him." A smile full of shark-like teeth shone in the dark. "Ah, that bizarre beast, eh? I'll use that jutsu then. Let me go instead. I've had a hard time finding my Jinchuriki, and I've been starting to get irritated." "No, I will go." The predatory grin shifted into a scowl. "I have a personal vendetta against that man." Indeed, after all, that jutsu is suitable for you, as you have a large amount of chakra even for us Akatsuki, kiss him. However, I'll still need to have 30% of your chakra. Zetsu spoke up. There's another shinobi of the leaf. Pain looked around for volunteers. Well, who's next? There was movement in the darkness beyond his cell. While there were no walls or bars to serve the name, they weren't exactly needed. It had started when that statue first appeared. A small shift that he could have believed to be his own mind malfunctioning. But as time passed, it grew as if struggling against bonds like his own. Broly didn't fear it, not entirely, but he felt resigned to whatever fate would throw at him next. After everything that's happened, it wouldn't surprise him that some abomination made itself home within his mind. He looked out through his eyes. The man, a child really from young he looked, was falling apart. The cracks that lined his body had steadily grown more severe as his power was ripped from his body. It was a terrible way to die, he thought, to have your very strength stripped from you. Better a powerless death than a strengthless life. With a bitter taste in his mouth from the sight, his eyes wandered once more about the cave. How could anyone stay still for so long willingly? Broly heard motion from the corner of his vision, and he quickly looked. Nothing. Pain felt the release of his hold on the two bodies he sent out for the Leaf Nin. The jutsu has been released, but he looked over at the two he sent out. We've been able to buy a considerable amount of time. Well done, Itachi and kiss him. Sasori made his disapproval known with a grunt. You say that so simply. I had to give up two of my subordinates as sacrifices for your jutsu. The Rinnegan wielder brushed off the puppet master. With my shape-shifting technique, they became Akatsuki members, even for just a little while. I'd think they should be thanking us. The line of red chakra coming from Gaara's body thinned out. Almost there, isn't it? Zetsu, dispose of the two used for the shape-shifting technique. Understood. Itachi, how many are there and who are they? From Konoha, Hada Kakashi, Haruno Sakura, and the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Naruto. From Suna, an advisor named Chiyo. Sasori looked shocked by the last name, but no one made any mention of it. Another Jinchuriki. The leader muttered without inflection. Madara still wanted them collected despite Broly's apparent power. He still needed to clear the air with the Uchiha, but it would be a net positive to capture the Nine Tails regardless. As the ritual finished up, they heard the crash of a fist against a barrier set up at the cavern's entrance. Sasori, Deidara, and Broly. Capture the Jinchuriki alive. The rest of you scatter. So that's the mystery man's name, yeah. The blonde thought as Itachi described the Kyuubi's container as the one to shout loudly and rush at you in response to Sasori's request for a description. That's all. You have nothing more specific, yeah? The bomber asked, which the stoic Uchiha promptly ignored. TCH. As the Akatsuki disappeared, Pain stayed behind a few more moments. I'll be waiting for contact. He glanced at the Saiyan who stood up from his seat on the ground. Be careful. Sasori chuckled as he eyed Broly. He's that green. I was speaking to you too. The leader left in a puff of smoke. The two shinobi looked at each with indignant confusion. We'll break in with a button hook entry. The silver-haired Jonin yelled as he got ready to pull the seal from the rock. Naruto stood on the right side of the entrance while Chiyo was on the left. Sakura. Kakashi ripped the paper from the massive boulder that blocked their way. Okay. The pink-haired Kunoichi yelled as she slammed her chakra-infused fist into the stone. As the wall of rock crumbled, he felt the chains fall from him and a feeling of defeated joy went through him. Madara had warned him of this. During combat he would be free, but only in the sense that he had a first-person view of everything. He couldn't speak or interact with anyone, just watch. If it was any solace, everyone barring Akatsuki and the Jinchuriki as Madara called them of course was fair game. The four shinobi moved in, but they hesitated. There stood a man they've never seen before with Sasori, Deidara, and a large clay bird flanking him. His eyes were burning red, and his foot was on Gaara's head. Well then, which of you is the Jinchuriki, I wonder? Yeah. Naruto's face took a feral appearance as his whisker-like marks thickened and his teeth sharpened. The utter disrespect to his friend's seemingly unconscious body was enough to cause malevolent chakra to rise from his being. You bastards. I'll smash you to pieces. That one? Well, seems like it, yeah. The blonde Leaf Nin stared at the Kazukiya's unmoving form for any signs of life. Gaara, what are you doing, sleeping there lazily? Stand the hell up. His fellow ninja gave him concerned looks as he hunched over, the beginnings of a cloak starting to form. Broly was intrigued by the desperation present in the brat. He would be fun to break. Hey. Gaara, are you listening too? Broly held up a hand and Naruto stopped at the odd gesture. Why was he sticking out his thumb like that? The Saiyan gave him a bloodthirsty grin. Even as limited as he was, he still needed to cut loose. His blood screamed for combat. In this moment, there would be nothing else. He knew the brat would hold back if he thought there was a possibility of injury towards the kid under his boot. They seemed close like that. With all eyes on him, Broly put his thumb down and crushed Gaara's skull. Oh no, Sakura's eyes widened in horror at the sand and gore on the Akatsuki member's boot. A monstrous roar rang out in the cave as Naruto's mind registered the reality of the situation. They came too late to save his friend. The blonde Jinchuriki got on all fours as two more tails of chakra formed behind him. I'll kill you. The shinobi leapt forward, the ground beneath him cratered at the jump, with a massive Rasengan already formed in his hand. Broly was all too eager to mimic the feral young man, as his own hand was filled with Kai. Everyone. Fall back. Kakashi yelled as he quickly put distance between him and the two warriors. He couldn't feel out the Akatsuki's strength, but he knew Naruto's output alone could cause serious collateral damage. Madara and Sasori seemed to think the same as they too made their way in the opposite direction. Giant Rasengan. The two powers met in a titanic clash that quickly exploded and sent tremors for hundreds of feet in all directions. Naruto was thrown out of the cloud of smoke, his injuries already mostly healed, and righted himself before slamming his claws into the earth to stop his momentum. The cloud cleared, revealing a hole of broken earth at the end of a trail of dug-up ground. From the looks of things, the explosion forced his Broly underground rather than away like it did his aggressor. Madara whistled at the sight from atop his clay bird. What fantastic heart. It's a shame that he bit off more than he could chew, yeah. Sasori eyed his teammate from below, his tail held in front of him protectively. You should know better than to speak too soon, Madara. Kakashi eyed his former student warily. He had never seen the knucklehead use this many tails before, and there was no knowing how well he was able to control himself. As he turned to Chio and Sakura to start trying to regain control of the situation, the sound of earth breaking reached their ears. Naruto's savage facade gave way to shock at what he saw. No way. I hit him directly. Broly's outstretched hand opened up and braced itself against the ground. The Saiyan pulled himself out of the rubble with only minor scratches adorning his form. An empty, soulless laugh rang out as he stood to his full height. The blonde Jinchuriki's anger reignited at the sound. If you think you can scare me, you've got another thing coming. The two went at each other again, this time with fists and claws instead of Kai and chakra. After a quick melee, Broly landed a hard punch to the whiskered teen's chest, which launched him out the side of the cavern. Without a second thought, the Saiyan chased after the boy. After several seconds of stunned silence, the remaining shinobi turned their gazes upon one another. Should we fight or grab Naruto and retreat, Kakashi-sensei? Whispered Sakura as she pumped chakra into her fists. Chio scoffed. The Kazekage is dead, the mission's a failure. Let's cut our losses and leave. Kakashi was inclined to agree, doubly so now given their opponents, but retreating was something easier said than done. If you think we'll just let you go, Sasori's tail coiled towards them like a snake ready to strike. You're sorely mistaken. Naruto bounced along the forest floor as if he were a pebble on the surface of a lake. He only stopped because he managed to find a comfortable boulder to slam his body against. He quickly recovered and his cloak darkened several shades as his control momentarily wavered. Come on, don't let the power control you. Broly blasted through the foliage with tremendous ease as he tried to take off his head with a clothesline. He ducked in time and grabbed the Saiyan with one of his tails. He lifted the Akatsuki member 50 feet into the air before slamming him into the dirt. Knowing he had merely moments to take advantage of this new opening, Naruto put his hands together in an all-too-familiar seal. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. 200 clones popped into existence instantly in the forest around the Saiyan as he broke from the Jinchuriki's tail. The Akatsuki member looked horribly confused in the moment before the hundreds of Narutos fell upon him with great fury. Broly took out clones 3 or 4 at a time with bone-crushing strikes, but it was an inevitability that he would soon be overwhelmed. 2 Rasengan got past his defenses and slammed into his bare chest. The impact of the jutsu was painful, much more so than he expected, yet he took it with hardly a reaction. It won't do to give his opponent hope. The Saiyan roared and a barrier of Kai blocked the remaining clones while taking out the successful duo. He shot up into the air and the ground below him caved in. With the many blondes below him off balance, Broly's body shone with a brilliant emerald as orbs of Kai rained down on the Jinchuriki from his form. As his remaining shadow clones were destroyed, Naruto dodged the many explosions that were littering his surroundings. His cloak could take plenty of damage before he himself would start to be affected, but there was no point in just staying still and taking it. The blonde shinobi stopped on a tree branch to survey his surroundings. A good square mile of the forest was gone in the wake of the Akatsuki's attack. So this is the kind of power that we're dealing with. He'd need to talk to Pervy Sage about increasing his training. This guy didn't have a tailed beast and look what he was capable of. Broly landed in the center of it all with a ground-cracking impact. His chest was scratched up, but the man wasn't fazed from the looks of things. It only made him angrier. He kills Gaara right in front of him and doesn't even have the decency to be hurt. His tails twitched behind him. Would you do it? Gaara was no threat to you. There was no point in killing him. Irideed was the only other one who knew what it was like to be him. To be considered a monster by his fellow villagers. To have your shot at a normal life ripped from you before you ever had a chance. Would he have to die? The man ignored his words as he paced towards him. Naruto's eyes watered as more of the Kyuubi's power flowed over him. Skin started to melt and fall away. The tree branch crumbled and burned underneath him, and he fell to the ground. With every step that Broly took, more of Naruto seemed to burn away. Another tail joined the other three. Two shining orbs and blinding smile of great gnashing teeth gazed upon the Saiyan where a face used to be. Any trace of humanity left was now merely an illusion. The transformation gave the man pause. The beast that used to be Naruto lifted its body, and dozens of globs of chakra both light and dark tore themselves away from its body. The tips of its tails gathered in front of its face as it seemingly beckoned its loose power back with a low growl. The chakra gathered in front of the Jinchuriki's face where it then condensed itself. The force of such an event cratered the ground around the crimson animal. After pausing for some moments, as if contemplating the sheer scale of what was going to happen, the miniature Kyuubi's mouth unhinged itself, the action ripping its cheeks apart. Broly took a step back as he thought on what to do. He'd seen his fair share of strange sights, but this was up there for sure. The thing then ate the sphere that it created and sunk into the ground. What the hell was it doing? The four tails blew up like a balloon, a comical sight were it not for the sheer amount of killing intent radiating off the beast. Kakashi nearly collapsed once Deidara's apparent suicide explosion was transported by his Kamui. They were fighting a losing battle, but with the explosive specialist out of the picture, they may have still stood a chance. Sakura pushed herself onto her shaky feet. She was forced to use the last of the antidote for Sasori's poison after she and Chio were caught in a hail of iron sand by the puppet master. It looked like the poison still took its toll. Sasori looked mildly irked at best at his partner's fate as his shield of iron sand melted away. A warning would have been appreciated, Deidara. The blonde Akatsuki member appeared from behind the puppet of the third Kazekage and his childlike partner with a shrug. I tried to get them by surprise, but it seems that didn't matter, yeah. The copy nin felt his stomach drop at the sight of the bomber. That Kamui took a lot of chakra to pull off and he was running on fumes because of it. His student and the elderly advisor from the sand weren't much better off either. That was when they all felt it. While the nine-tailed fox's chakra had weighed down on the shinobi, it was possible to tune it out. Now, it felt like the demon itself had them in its grasp. Kakashi Chio called out between gasps as she grasped at her chest. She had the most trouble dealing with the influx of the evil chakra. That kid didn't. The masked shinobi shook his head. Well, it was bad, he was there when the nine tails attacked the village. This was just a fraction of it. No, but I'm worried. This is a lot of power he's releasing. The chakra burst from his mouth with the force of a missile. Broly, unsure if he could take such a hit with how weak he was, jumped to the side and avoided the attack entirely. The Saiyan followed the blast with his eyes. A pleased smile appeared on his face. The boy had launched a trident at the cave. Kakashi turned to the cave entrance with a heavy feeling in his gut. He could see, just barely, the missile heading right to them. It would be seconds before it hit. Damn it all. Thought the shinobi when he brought his attention back to his allies who were seemingly oblivious to their impending doom. We need to run. Sakura tensed to move but a vice grip on her upper arm stopped her. Faster than she could react, the copycat ninja grabbed the Kunoichi and Chio. He flung the two out of the cave with the last of his remaining strength to their protests. Sakura rose from the ground with a snarl. The man had too little chakra to be pulling heroic moves like that. That's when she felt the heat. A roaring ball of condensed fire raced past her, the force of its movements ruffling her hair and clothes. There's no way she was going to reach him in time. There was no way he was going to move out of the way in time. Kakashi. He looked back at the child as an explosion rocked the mountain where the battle began. He hated how pleased he was. It wasn't from some misplaced sense of morality, he would have done this voluntarily regardless, but because he was being forced to fight by Madara's orders. He braced himself against the massive red hand that slammed into his form. Its fingers wrapped around his torso and they burned him. As he twisted his body, the appendage separated from the rest of the limb before disintegrating into a fine mist. A mist that he breathed in. Contact with whatever the boy was made was to be avoided. That was the rule he made for himself as he staggered back at the sudden pain in his chest. It felt like something was eating away at his lungs. The great roar shook him as the four-tailed abomination lunged at him. He reached out, a semi-formed blob of Kai in his hand, and forced it between its eyes. The Saiyan pushed through the blast to follow up with a right hook to the thing's face. His knuckles met resistance for but a moment before its head seemingly exploded. He wasn't prepared for the sudden absence and fell forward as a new head formed next to his fist. What? Broly thought as he was squashed between the ground and the boy's claws. He swiped at the hand to cut it off, but 3 more joined its place to pin his arms and torso. His skin felt like it was being torn apart by 1,000 knives all across his body. His vision blurred from the pain. He had never known such agony was possible before. Its face hung in front of him, its blank eyes saying nothing. 4 tails rose up, their points directed at him. I still have a man to kill. I won't die now. Broly brought forth all the power at his disposal. It wasn't much, but it'd have to do. He released it all at once just as the tails descended upon him. Its eyes widened as its arms were suddenly blown away and a wall of green overtook the beast. The earth shook violently from the outburst of energy. A shining emerald painted everything around. Kakashi blinked away the haze that had settled over his vision. A high-pitched ringing in his ears deafened him as he tried to take stock on the situation. He was alive for starters, which was always a good thing. The residue of the 9 tails chakra weighed heavy in the air. That blast was headed straight for him, and he knew he didn't make a move, so that had to have meant that someone had saved him. It couldn't have been Sakura or Chio, since he made a point of tossing them out of the way, so who could it? Kakashi. It's terribly youthful to just lay on the ground like that. Ah, that makes sense. He sat up with a groan, his body hurt all over from fighting Deidara. Guy, it's good to see you. The eccentric man gave Kakashi a smile that was just a little too bright for him if the sudden headache said anything. The feeling's mutual, my friend. Are you alright? Never better. The copycat ninja quipped as he rose to his feet. His student and the advisor from Suna were nowhere to be found. Nor was the mountain they had originally arrived at apparently. Sakura and Chio. Safe with my team, he paused. Though I am not sure how long that will last. Let's find them then. Kakashi went to move but stumbled. His balance was still recovering it seemed. Guy put a hand on his shoulder. Are you sure you're okay? The silver-haired man sighed. Not until I see my team, he glanced at Guy. But I'm good to move if that's what you mean. His response was met with an overly wide grin from the spandex-clad Taijutsu specialist. Ha. It's good to see the flames of youth still burning bright within you, my eternal rival. Right. Moments later, the two were reunited with the rest of their teams. Rock Lee was the first to notice the two. Guy-sensei. He cried out before he ran to Guy, followed closely by Niji and Tenten. Kakashi-sensei, you're alive. Sakura ran over to him and caught him before he fell over. Looked like she wanted to hug the man but resisted the urge, instead putting a glowing green hand to the man. From what I can see, it looks like there's nothing that's gonna kill you in the near future, she paused. Except for the severe chakra exhaustion, how are you still standing? Where are Deidara and Sasori? Hopefully dead, but we've got a bigger problem at the moment. Chio looked in the direction where the battle between Naruto and the mysterious Akatsuki seemingly ended with a bang. The Kyuubi's chakra is gone. The sudden dread enveloped the group. Kakashi's voice, severe in a way that accepted no argument, cut through the silence. We need to move. Now. His body was launched from the epicenter of the explosion, smoking and covered in burns, the protective cloak of the Kyuubi's chakra gone. The shinobi barely registered crashing through the canopy of the forest or the tearing of his clothes. Every inch of his skin cried out in agony, even as it was healed by his resident's power. He lost control. That much was easy to see what with the ruined landscape and his lack of any memories. Smoke blocked out the sun. Despite his pain, Naruto clenched his fists in frustration and guilt. He was too late to save Gaara and he flew off the handles. He thought he was better than this, but seeing Gaara he grit his teeth. He could see everybody now yelling at him that he threw his life away in a pointless fight. It wasn't like he would be able to defend himself in his state. Not that he would let that fact stop him. His attention was suddenly drawn to the sound of twigs snapping. Broly's form could be seen limping through the trees. Naruto struggled to his feet, exhaustion permeated his entire being. He wouldn't just lie down and take it, death was preferable to just giving up. His ragged breath stopped him momentarily. For more. The Saiyan scowled at him before a disoriented look came over his face. The Akatsuki member stopped to support himself against a tree. He could feel his energy fluctuating, whatever coated the boy just moments ago was seeping into his skin. Broly put his hand on one of the angry red marks all over his torso. That fucking hurt. Naruto wanted to smile, the knowledge that he hurt the man responsible for Gaara's death brought him some pride, but he didn't. The man was still breathing and still capable of potentially capturing him. You actually talk, huh? For a minute there, I thought you were mute. The man seemed surprised at the acknowledgement and quickly palmed the marking on his forehead. So I can. The uncertainty in his voice was obvious even to Naruto. Why do you sound so confused? Wouldn't you be the first person to know if you could? A million thoughts were racing through Broly's mind. The masked man said that his ability to speak was blocked, there was no reason to tell him that if that wasn't the case. Something was interfering with the hold that bastard held over him. Something loosened the hold. Was it that red stuff that was seemingly burrowing into him? No time to dwell on it now. It was just his voice from what he could tell. He would have to appeal to the boy's compassion if he were to have a chance at escaping Madara's clutches. A task which would have been much simpler if he didn't kill the kid's friend. He raced at the boy, the compulsion to continue fighting him was still beyond resisting. The kid dodged his punch by fractions of a second before it would connect. I probably don't have much time before Madara realizes there's an issue. The anger on the boy's face was replaced with surprise, and it urged him on. I'm being contra-HNGH. It felt like something clamped down on his throat. He could feel his energy stabilizing. Whatever was affecting his system was quickly fading. Naruto retaliated with a punch of his own that connected to little effect. It felt like punching a tree trunk. You're being what? He asked, a curiosity building within him. The Saiyan swiped at him, the attack passing just over the shinobi's nose as he fell onto his back to dodge. He raised a boot, but the knucklehead ninja rolled out of the way as he brought it down. Broly struggled with his words. Jin-HNN, Jinjutsu. Titswathakalated. Ninjutsu? It took a moment before the dots connected themselves in his mind. Oh, Jinjutsu. Wait, you're being controlled by Jinjutsu? The skepticism there was obvious. It took every ounce of his remaining will to nod before the Jinjutsu full reasserted itself. How do I know you're not trying to trick me? Damn it, now he grows a brain, the man yelled in his mind as he stalked towards the ninja. Well, it looks like the newbie is having trouble with Kyuubi Jinchuriki, yeah. Naruto turned to the origin of the voice to see the feminine man from earlier jump off a giant clay bird along with the hunchback. Judging by the marks on their skin and the strong smell of ash, the two had seen better days. We barely escaped that little attack of his ourselves, yeah. I would say to just leave him, but Sasori paced around Naruto and stopped when the Akatsuki had formed a triangle around the blonde shinobi. This is the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, we're not risking his escape. The puppet wielder looked to Broly. Good job tiring him out, it'll make this much easier. Six Gate of Joy, open. The glowing green blur rocketed past Naruto and slammed into Madara. The last thing the Iwa terrorist saw before being launched away was a crimson fist. As the forest in front of him was felled, Guy quickly shot off to Sasori, who had brought down his tail to block the attack. The Taijutsu specialist's leg broke through the impromptu shield with ease before crashing through his puppet body. Leaf Whirlwind. Broly turned at the deafening exclamation to see someone's heel heading towards his face. The Saiyan leaned back to avoid the blow, but it was a feint for a sweep to his legs. As the son of Paragus fell, a pink-haired woman jumped in front of him with a fist pulled back. Shanro. Broly hit the ground hard, an intense sting on his cheek and a ringing in his head, and bounced through several trees before being stopped by a particularly generous boulder. Everything around him was spinning. He heard someone's muffled orders, something about splitting up, but he couldn't afford to care. That was too hard of a punch to not dwell on. He thought with his energy stabilizing it would restore his strength, but that couldn't be the case. There was no other reasonable explanation for his sudden weakness, unless the burning rage monster he fought earlier was somehow weaker than this girl. The weak groan escaped him as he pulled himself to his feet using the rock as support. The world soon stopped and came into focus. It was just in time too as he dodged a palm by the skin of his teeth. That wasn't the girl. Broly countered the new challenger with a punch aimed for the teen's stomach, but he gracefully spun around the attack. 8 trigrams. Palm rotation. The blank-eyed shinobi yelled as he used his momentum to engage his clan's jutsu. The bubble of chakra that poured out of him threw the Saiyan through the boulder behind him as a knife with some paper attached to it flew at him. The paper spontaneously combusted and engulfed the sealed man in fire and shrapnel. Broly had to remind himself, as he wiped the soot off his face, not to kill them right where they stood. They were the boy's allies, and if he just ripped their heads from their shoulders, no matter how satisfying that would be, it would just put him deeper in the hole. He had just planted the idea that he was being controlled, it would be in his best interest to not ruin that. Though the temptation only grew when he saw the ridiculous pose of the teen in front of him. You're in the range of my divination. The hell he was. As the young man shot forward, the Saiyan put up a barrier of Kai that stopped him in his tracks. The lack of any real reaction only solidified the son of Paragus's next course of action. He grabbed the front of the teen's robes and pushed before turning on the girl with the buns that had thrown that knife. Niji. She yelled impotently as the teen slammed into a tree and fell to the ground unconscious. She turned back to Broly with a mix of determination and fear before she pulled a massive scroll from her lower back and unfurled it. With a puff of smoke, 2 smaller scrolls appeared in her hands as she put the original back in place. Twin rising dragons. She leapt into the air, the scrolls unfurling and twisting around her. It was almost impressive just how many weapons rained down on the Saiyan a mere moment later. He raised his arms to protect his face from the dozens of razor-sharp weapons hitting him. While many left nicks in his skin, none could truly cut through his skin. Broly leapt at the bewildered girl, his arm catching her by the waist, and they both promptly fell to the ground. The Saiyan made it a point to slam her through a tree branch on the way down. With the two out of the way, it was time to go back to his allies. Co-workers. He didn't know what to call those two freaks he spent the last few days with. That blonde kid was the only one who could potentially help him, and letting whatever the fuck this group was capture him would be detrimental. He swiftly made his way through the forest he was knocked through, only to stop as a hole in reality opened up in front of him. Madara stepped out, and his own consciousness was forced back into his shackles. We're done here. The two disappeared an instant later. Sakura let out a held breath as Sasori metaphorically breathed his last. Exhaustion poured out of her very soul, and it wasn't hard to see that Kakashi himself was on his last legs. Do you think he was telling the truth about the meeting with the spy? I would take what he said with a grain of salt, but he sighed once he slid his headband down over his eye. But it's worth checking out regardless. I'll have to talk with Tsunade about it. We should check on your friends before anything else. Chio made gesture with her head. I don't hear anything coming from their direction. No need to worry. We're right here. Shouted Rock Lee as he and Naruto came out from behind a tree with Might Guy in tow. The Chunin's expression became serious. Sensei needs help, the gates showed him no mercy. Sakura nodded as she made her way to Guy with a glowing hand. The man fell into her as Lee and Naruto let him go. She swiftly laid him out flat on the ground as her hand moved along his torso. She shook her head. He'll need a hospital to get him back to 100%, I'd pass out of chakra exhaustion before I could fix everything. Lee nodded gravely as Naruto's fists clenched. Sakura noted the anger on the blonde's face. What happened with Deidara? Kakashi chimed in. Did he escape? The two teens shook their heads. Guy was able to defeat him. It seems the Akatsuki had relatively little in the way of close-range techniques. With me, Naruto, and the 8 gates behind him, one sensei got past his explosive ninjutsu, it was over pretty quickly. Where's Neji and Tenten? Naruto asked out of the blue. Oh no. Lee shouted in horror as he was reminded of his teammates. They're alone against that other Akatsuki. We have to get them. Let's go then. Wait, Naruto. The two shinobi jumped to the trees before Kakashi could grab onto the blonde shinobi. Damn it. Sakura, Chio, stay here. The copycat ninja chased after the impulsive duo. The three ninja arrived to what was a chilling sight at first glance. Tenten and Neji's bodies were unmoving, and Broly was nowhere to be found. Lee quickly dashed over to the weapon specialist's form before letting out a sigh of relief. She's alive, he looked over to Kakashi who had rushed to Neji right after him. Is he? Kakashi shook his head. Just unconscious though his breathing is ragged. Let's get them back to Sakura and see what she has to say. As they picked up the remnants of Team Guy, Naruto thought back to his own confrontation with their opponent. This was all his fault. He failed against the Akatsuki and they were forced to face him. It was a miracle they were alive. If only he was stronger, if he was faster, he could have prevented all of this. Bushy Brow's team would have been okay and Gaara would be alive. If you had simply accepted me from the beginning, they would all be okay, the monstrous voice of the Kyuubi spoke in the back of his mind. But you didn't and here we are. Naruto. The Jinchuriki snapped out of his thoughts. Huh, he turned to Kakashi confused. Yeah. He could see the concern on his sensei's face. Are you alright? Naruto nodded without a thought. I'm fine. Kakashi stared for a few uncomfortable moments before he leapt off into the trees with Neji. Come on then, it's time to go back to Konoha. Naruto followed close by, his thoughts still back where he last fought Broly. The man was supposedly being controlled, he said as much, but was it a lie? He wouldn't put it past an Akatsuki to lie about something like that. Pulling back, it didn't make sense in the first place. He was strong enough to be in the Akatsuki, but couldn't shake off a Jinjutsu that he was aware of. From the sound of it, he, supposedly, didn't even know what a Jinjutsu was. Kakashi. What are the odds of an Akatsuki not knowing about Jinjutsu? Kakashi shot him a puzzled look. Non-existent. You don't get to where they are if something like Jinjutsu escaped them. Why the question? The man I fought, he said he was being controlled by Jinjutsu, but the thing is he couldn't pronounce the word right. Silence passed between them for a few uneasy seconds. It was probably just something to throw you off. He also mentioned who was controlling him. Some guy named Madara. Naruto almost crashed into his sensei who stumbled in shock at the name. Naruto, Kakashi's voice was grave, not unlike someone recounting the horrors of war. Are you sure you heard that name? The sudden nervousness overtook the blonde. Why yeah. We need to go back to the village. Aim. To say the trial went badly was putting it lightly. Even with Broly, or probably because of him, he lost 2 subordinates and he didn't even have the Kyuubi to show for it. While they weren't truly needed, it was an unwanted cut to his available resources. On the bright side, his control hardly wavered even through all the chaos. There are few moments there where it seemed to lessen, but the amount was minuscule. With time, he would overcome the limitations of the conversion seal. The Uchiha motioned to Pain, and the figure had activated the kill switch on the Saiyan's chest. The oppressive feeling of the man's power vanished as Madara released his hold. No point in wasting chakra when he was little more than a civilian without his power. Broly fell to his knees in surprise. Why would his oppressor just let him go? Fearing there was little time before he became restricted again, the Saiyan looked out the gaping maw of the balcony and leapt to his freedom without hesitation. He felt an all-encompassing force take a hold of him in midair, and he was ripped back. The orange-haired freak had his hand on his throat. An admirable attempt, the sarcasm didn't escape the struggling man. But ultimately futile. Put him away, Nagato. After some time spent hanging by his neck, he was put behind bars, actual bars of a real prison, and the two left him alone. Broly quickly got up and put his hands to the cool metal. He couldn't bend them. He struck at the rods with what force he could muster, but all it did was make his knuckles hurt. It was all pointless. He could feel the emptiness of his body and knew what that meant. He was a helpless creature like the rest of them. The son of Paragus turned and sat on the floor at the back of the cell. The only noise was the pitter-patter of Aim's endless rain. Deep within him lay the burning desire to try everything he could to escape, but it tempered by the reality of his situation. He only escaped his father because his power was always there, it just needed his anger to be released. Here, he had the anger, but everything that made him strong was cut off completely. There was nothing there to be released unless Madara allowed it to be there. There was no point in hurting himself trying to get free from here. The Saiyan thought back on the brawl that happened mere minutes before. The blonde child, as much as it sickened him to think so, was his only hope. Hours passed, maybe days given the lack of any real timekeeping, before Broly found himself wanting to sleep. Catching up on some rest was a better use of his time than staring at a wall. As he let himself doze off, he heard a whisper in his ear. "Broly." The Saiyan sat up straight as a rod as he looked around his cell once more. Something said his name, but there was nothing responsible for the noise. He couldn't be losing his mind already. He just got it back. Shadows moved outside his cell. The quick shot of resignation blew through his body at the sight of the black robes and red clouds. It was with some relief that he realized it was the woman. It looked like she had some food in her hands. At least, he thought his stomach growled. At least, he hoped it was food. Broly stood as Conan put the bowl of sludge that was apparently his meal on the slot in the center of his door. He grabbed the pitiful serving and lifted a brow. "That's it?" The gruff comment seemed to rub her the wrong way as she scowled at him. "You will only get what you need to survive." That almost made him laugh as he downed the bowl in one quick action. "You won't have me for long if that's what you think is all I need. 20 more of those and maybe I won't wither away." Conan stared at the man unamused by his actions. It was clear he was used to being the superior one in whatever confrontations he was involved in. A habit he would be forced to break. Disrespecting your captors is a most unwise decision. The Saiyan dropped the bowl at her feet and the ceramic shattered. Some of the remaining gruel got on her robe. "What are you going to do about it? Kill me?" He held out his arms with a smug grin. "You better do it now while you can." He scoffed when she didn't budge. Of course she wouldn't save her own world. Broly moved closer and rested his forehead on the gate to his cell. His gaze roamed over her features. "It's amazing how similar you look to Saiyans, yet you're so pathetic." Even Kakarot and his group, the worms that they were, saw what would happen if he were left unchecked and fought him until they couldn't stand. "It's insulting how you and that orange-haired freak just roll over for Madara while looking the way you do." Conan felt nothing short of disgust for the man in front of her. He knew nothing of their struggles, and yet he passed judgment. The dozen pages of paper slipped out from the sleeves on her robes. Impotently threatening them was par for the course, but insulting Pain in her home? That was unacceptable. Her face didn't change as they tore into him at her will. He seemed human enough so she avoided any knowingly lethal blows. This was just to inflict pain, not injure. He fell to the side with hardly a sound, seemingly preferring to weather the storm than potentially end it early by alerting someone. Not that it would have. "It would be folly to kill you, Broly," she said as the paper joined her once more. "His cuts would heal within the next few days if his healing was anything like a human's. You're the key to peace for this world." Moments passed before Broly gave her a hateful glare. "Stop it. You're so full of shit it makes me want to vomit." The Saiyan pushed himself into a seated position. If he couldn't break her physically, he'd wear down her spirit. "I've seen this exact thing happen on more worlds than I could count." He gestured in the direction that Madara and Pain walked off to. It always turned out to be some idiot fooling even bigger idiots into helping them to rule the world. He paused. "Whenever I stuck around long enough to find out." Conan knew this was just an attempt to weaken her resolve, to make her doubt, but she didn't stop the man. She was curious as to where this would go. One time when I was much younger, I stumbled upon yet another one of these groups, but I was curious. His tone darkened. His father always told him how the weak would always seek the strong for their own self-preservation, and this was what truly cemented that lesson. Instead of destroying them immediately, I pretended to be on their side for some time. You know what happened right after I helped them win their little struggle? He chuckled before he hissed from the movement. A sense of unease crept into her mind, though she remained stoic. Their leader took control. Killed anyone strong enough to challenge him and forced the rest to submit. He wanted to laugh, but the cuts on his skin kept that idea at bay. I got bored by that point, so I just slaughtered everyone. Did it a few more times, but it was always the same. Conan saw right through what Broly was trying to do. It was a concept as old as the shinobi world to sow chaos in the enemy camp, but what troubled her was the sincerity that she could see in his words. As far as she could see, he wasn't lying. Then again, lest she forget, he wasn't human. It could very well be that his species' tells were vastly different to their own. If what he said was true, were they just follow the same path as many others before them? It stood to reason that, much like Broly, there were others out there beyond the skies who would appear and act just like humans. People like cycles. It's why, no matter how cruel previous conflicts are, they fought again and again. Every time for the same reasons. Land, food, wealth, power followed by short periods of peace. It's what helped the Akatsuki rise to their current height. The inherent predictability of humanity as a whole allowed them to exploit it. It wasn't a leap of logic to assume that they, just like humanity, went through cycles of violence and peace with groups like them fighting to break it. Her will steeled. While it may be true that others just like them had either failed or were merely another cycle, none of them could possibly claim to have Kami by their side. We're different. He shook his head as if she were a hopeless child. It angered her, but her expression betrayed nothing. You're not, you never are. Konoha. It was taxing to see the state her teammate was in. Of course, it made perfect sense why he was like the way he was. Gaara and Naruto had a special kinship, and the former's funeral was just days before, but something just seemed off. Even after the third's death, Naruto at least tried to act happy to cover his sadness. It was just how he coped with loss, but now it was like a piece of him, bigger than she wanted to believe, was irrevocably lost when the Redeed died. Naruto Sakura put a hand on the blonde's shoulder, but he didn't react. You need to eat. The shinobi made a barely audible noise in response. The ramen in front of him had long since gotten cold. She sighed, unsure on how to proceed. Why do I fail my friends, Sakura? The question took her by surprise. What do you mean? His eyes remained locked on the floor as his fists tightened. I failed Sasuke by not seeing the darkness within him before he left and not bringing him back when he did. Naruto wiped away at his eyes. And Gaara's dead because I wasn't fast enough to stop it. Naruto, you can't blame yourself for Gaara's death. You didn't pull the one tails out of him. I know, but… No, Naruto. Her face softened along with her tone. I know it's hard to lose a friend, but there's no point in believing that you're at fault. He stayed quiet and she sighed. It was unsettling how routine moments like these had become. The blonde blamed himself, someone refutes him, and he shuts down. Knowing there was no progress to be made, Sakura stood from her seat. It was time for her to go back to the hospital. Can you at least take a few bites before you toss it out? The grunt was all she got in response. Once Sakura was out of sight, Naruto put the ramen to the side and headed to his bed. Normally, he would be out and about on a mission by now, but Tsunade'd let him take some time off to recover. She didn't want him ending up like Kakashi. As the shinobi laid his head down on his pillow, he felt the presence of something in his room. Or rather, in him. Have you decided on what to do? Naruto winced at the voice. He remembered all too clearly the discussion they had after Gaara's funeral. Discussion wasn't the right word since that meant it was a two-way conversation. All he did was listen to the tailed beast. The room he was in was replaced by the cold, dark sower of his mind. The fox sat in front of him, a predatory glint in its eyes. I can make you strong. Truly strong. You will never lose another with me. The shinobi hesitated to speak. He wouldn't give himself up for the promise of power. Especially not to the Kyuubi. Why are you trying to help me now? You've never tried before. The fox unintentionally mimicked him with its own hesitation. I lost a brother to those wretched Akatsuki, and I can't do anything about it in this cage. The flash of guilt gripped Naruto. It made sense that the tailed beasts were related somehow, but he never saw it like that. It was more surprising that the fox was capable of something like sadness. I want to make them pay with blood and broken bones, but I need your help to do that. It was a strange feeling to relate to something so unlike him though not unfamiliar. He remembered having the same thought once he found out about how Gaara was like him. They shared the same burden, but where he had support, Gaara had assassination attempts. It was like looking in a twisted mirror. That understanding that only came with first-hand experience was something that Sakura and the others failed to comprehend. It was why his death hit him so hard. But relating to someone and trusting them to not stab you in the back were two separate things entirely. Naruto looked at the Nine Tails with a hard gaze. Mark my words, I will beat the Akatsuki, but I can't depend on you. Not yet anyways. The last word spilled out as the Kyuubi snarled, apparently displeased with the answer. You have threatened me and my friends a lot in. Leave me. The blonde shinobi looked down at the ground at the demand. He didn't want to meet the fox's eyes. The Nine Tails was extending an olive branch, and here he was rejecting it. He closed his eyes and faded from the mindscape. Kurama's lips turned up into a smile once the boy was gone. He was too trusting. So desperate was he to find good in everyone that it was child's play to manipulate the kid. This was the break in that damnable armor of childish optimism he always wore. They would grow closer together in their shared but ultimately false grief. When the child was at his most vulnerable, he would strike. He would either break out of his prison or gain control of his vessel. Either way improved his chances against those damned Akatsuki. Kurama circled in his cage several times before laying down for a nap. All this acting and planning was tiring. Aim. Pain looked over his village as the conversation with Madara replayed in his head. It was a brief but tense affair as he questioned why they haven't set the final steps of their plan in motion. They had their super weapon, so why are they not using it? My control is not yet absolute. One moment of his freedom is all that is needed to turn all upon which we stand into nothing but loose rubble. His reasoning was sound, but there was doubt in his mind. It felt like the Uchiha was hiding something from them all. An underlying motive to his need for the Saiyan. What could it be? There was no mistaking that he needed the Biju. His insistence on continuing to collect them was proof enough of that, but what else could they possibly be used for? What could someone with all this chakra use it for if not a weapon? He felt the presence of Aim's angel before her form fully coalesced behind him. He could feel the reluctance within her. It wasn't unusual for his paths to elicit that reaction, but never from her. Clearly, something was wrong if she came to the closer diva rather than take the time to go to his true self like she normally did. Something is troubling you. She made her way to his side, unsurprised that he could see right through her. It was a mutual skill they developed in all their years together. She paused, looking for the right word. Troubling conversation with our prisoner. He looked to her, his eyes unblinking. She wasn't one to be easily startled. Explain. And so she did. The revelation that there were others out there in the reaches of the night sky was not an unexpected one. The sage spoke of their weapon falling from the stars, so it was reasonable to assume there were other celestial beings like him out there. What had him on edge was how he spoke of their efforts. How conventional they were in the grand scheme of things. If the Saiyan's words were true, who was their betrayer in this iteration of the pattern? Madara. The name came unbidden to the forefront of his mind, but was it unwarranted? Do you believe what he says to be true? He has all the reasons to lie. Pain stayed silent. He knew she wanted to say more. But I could not find deception in him. Perhaps the manner in which his species revealed deceit is different than ours. Or he's telling the truth. Silence passed between them as they mulled over the ramifications of the knowledge the celestial being had gifted them. I need to think this over. Thank you, Conan. She left without a trace as she does, and he was left alone save for his thoughts. The Saiyan was smarter than he gave him credit for. Or perhaps this was an unintended consequence of his bravado. To sow doubt in Conan was something he previously thought impossible. Then again, he also thought that beings from other stars were little more than literature devices in myths and legends, but there was one down below, so perhaps he should re-evaluate what he considered possible. He could feel the doubt spread like a virus within his mind. Was this an avoidable fate or were they doomed from the beginning? Broly mentioned that it was the leader that seized control every time. To someone on the outside, that would be him, but he truly wanted peace. He had no desire to simply rule the world as it were. It was Madara. It had to be. His motivations, his true motivations, were a mystery to him, and, if Nagato was being honest with himself, he had become more of a figurehead since the Uchiha became involved. What was he to do? Given the casualties suffered recently by the Akatsuki, it was pertinent that he made his control over the Saiyan absolute. It had only been 2 weeks since the Pyrrhic victory of the One Tails retrieval mission, and they had lost Haiden and Kakuzu as well. Sure, they had gained the 2, 3, and 6 tails in the meantime, but this was not a sustainable strategy. Madara walked through the corpses littering the street like a proverbial reaper, only this time his hands were mostly clean. Physically anyways. Broly pulled his hands apart and his victim's chest followed in their stead. He tossed the halves of the man away as the Uchiha approached. Another success. The stench of death was strongest on the Saiyan who was covered in blood and bile. He had wanted to see how the alien fared with only Taijutsu. Needless to say, he had done admirably. Of course, there were a few stragglers, but he had taken care of them himself. His control was getting stronger every day as the intricacies and flaws of the conversion seal on Broly's head made themselves known. For a product of the Sage of Six Paths, it was poor. Madara waved him off. Find the nearest body of water and wash yourself off. Broly turned right and moved out of sight to the river right outside the village. Zetsu appeared behind him and the Uchiha could only sigh. Every time the plant man has shown up lately, it was always a mixed bag of losses and wins. What news do you bring, Zetsu? Orochimaru is dead. Felled by Sasuke's hand. The plant creature looked around at the carnage and whistled. Subtlety is not a strong suit for him, is it? There was that bit of good news. The snake was an unpredictable variable in his plans, so to see him gone is some relief. Zetsu's black half's visage shifted into one of disgust. From what we've gathered, Sasuke has brought together some shinobi to aid him in killing Itachi. Like he could such a thing. Pain is going to be calling for a meeting to update everyone in a bit. It seems he's worried about the boy potentially disrupting our plans. More than they've already been. Well, yes, I'd imagine. So little Sasuke is finally going to try and kill Itachi. Knowing what he did about the elder sibling, he wouldn't dare kill his brother. Perhaps, once their battle is finished, he could recruit Sasuke and his allies or manipulate them into working for him. The Akatsuki could use some filling out. Madara felt a ping from the ring on his finger. Good timing on the Rinnegan wielder's part. Moments afterwards, a holographic form of himself stood in a room surrounded by the rest of the members of the Akatsuki. Broly stood to his left. It was difficult to tether his own ring to the Saiyans, but it allowed him to bring him into the fold without raising suspicion from his subordinates. Kisame was holding the body of the Four Tails. Good, another one off the list. The discussion went as Zetsu described with the deaths of their own and Orochimaru being the main talking points. Of course, he'd put in his own interjections as Toby. It was a tedious task, but the more outlandish the personality, the less seriously people would take him. Now if only he had somebody inconsequential to antagonize. Deidara seemed like he would have been perfect to provide him some brief entertainment, but alas, that was not possible. He eyed Itachi as they spoke about Sasuke and what to do about him. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities for the man to disregard his current mission of gathering the Jinchurikis for a reunion with his brother. In fact, he was certain of it. He'd have to keep an eye on the clan killer so as to not miss his opportunity to get at Sasuke. Pain held up his joined hands. We'll discuss this further once the Four Tails is sealed. The rest of the group followed suit as shadowy dragons poured forth from the Jito statue. Madara glanced at the Saiyan next to him. Kai and Chakra were similar enough that, theoretically, there shouldn't be complications from including him in the ritual. He tested it with Nagato not long ago, and it went without a hitch as far as they could see. Most would advise against the use of the alien, but with the end goal of his plan so close and losing so many of his assets so quickly, caution was a luxury. Naruto was an easy kid to read. Unusual for a shinobi, but she thought it to be part of his charm. So when Tsunade told them that Orochimaru was killed by Sasuke, she expected some celebration on both his and Sakura's part. Of course, she got it, but the kid lacked some of the enthusiasm she had hoped to see. It seems Gaara's death still weighed heavily on his mind. So that means Sasuke's coming back, right? The Hokage remained quiet as Jiraiya informed the blonde that no, Sasuke wasn't coming back. Righteous anger poured from the Jinchuriki, while the spymaster explained that Sasuke still seeked to kill his brother. The whiskers on his face darkened and she could see the fox's influence color his eyes. She stepped around the desk and laid a hard hand on his shoulder. Naruto, calm down. He held onto his anger for a few too many moments before his visage returned to normal. Tsunade glanced at Jiraiya who grimaced at the silent message. Sorry, I lost myself there. It shouldn't have been so easy for the Nine Tails chakra to bleed into Naruto like it did in that moment. It took a great amount of rage to draw it out under normal conditions, and, while the brat was angry, the mismatch between how mad he was now and how furious he'd normally be for the red chakra to present itself was far greater than reasonable. The Kashi came in with a hand in his pocket like this was a casual stroll down a street rather than entering the Hokage's office. It would do for the man to show a little more reverence, but if the third couldn't do it, she wouldn't. The slight tension in his body language told her that he was well aware of what had just occurred. The momentary distraction was a welcome one as the Jonin launched into the briefing for their mission. Capturing Itachi would not be an easy task, but their best chance at finding Sasuke would be to capture his brother. The mention of the Akatsuki caused Naruto's expression to grow more severe. Tsunade briefly contemplated holding back the shinobi from the mission, but struck the thought down. His current emotional state could cause him to be reckless in their fight against Itachi and potentially lead to his capture, but he was dead set on aiding in whatever capacity to bring back Sasuke. He'd probably just sneak out of the village, which meant they had no way to track him at that point. As much as she hated to admit, there was lower risk in letting him on this mission. Once the meeting was over and her office was empty, Tsunade sighed. The brat has you worried. Coming from Jiraiya, she knew it to be a rhetorical question. Hell, she'd be concerned if the Toad Sage wasn't worried himself. Oh, what she would do for some sake. He's drawing on the fox's power too easily. You want me to check his seal? Tsunade shook her head. No, I don't think it's from the seal weakening or anything like that. She thought about his recent behavior and how notably different it was since the failure of the Kazukiage retrieval mission. His latest mission talked about the brutality displayed in his disposal of Kakuzu. While it wasn't against any rules or regulations, dismembering an opponent before seemingly wiping them from existence was a concerning course of action. Gaara's death has affected him on a deeper level than we expected. Jiraiya grimaced at what she implied. He's not going to sit still for any therapy or counseling, you know that. What do you suggest then? He went silent for a moment. I could take him out to Mount Myaboku. She was surprised by the suggestion. You think training him to be a sage is what he needs? In order to be a sage, he has to be at balance both physically and mentally. If anything is going to help him get past this, that is going to be the ticket. She sat back and thought about the man's suggestion. There was great peril when it came to becoming a sage. He could just as well turn into a statue rather than heal from his grief. I trust your judgment, Jiraiya. If you think he's ready, go for it. Another one of the Jito statue's eyes opened as the last of the Four Tails chakra was sealed away. Its pupils had gained a subtle green glow with the end of the ritual. Madara made note of the new development. If Kai and chakra could be joined in the same vessel, it could open a whole new world of possibilities. Pain looked away as if listening to someone who wasn't there. One of my spies has informed me that Kakashi and the Nine Tails have been sent out to retrieve Sasuke along with 2 platoons of shinobi. Really? Kisame grinned, making a show of exposing all of his razor-sharp teeth. So what's the plan? Kisame asked as he heaved Samehada on his shoulder. Go after the Nine Tails or Itachi's brother. Focus on the Jinchuriki. If Sasuke interferes, dispose of him. Ooh. Broly and I will grab the Kyuubi. Toby flailed as he put an arm around the Saiyan. It'll be fun. The others didn't react in any meaningful manner as they were all too used to it. Kisame shrugged. Fine by me. Return to your objectives. Pain began to fade away as did the rest. Do not fail me. Madara let go of Broly once they were out of the cave. Itachi would die against his brother as he would refuse to kill his younger sibling, but that was a planned loss. No use interfering there though, he'd have to be fast with the Kyuubi. This was a prime opportunity to capture the Nine Tails and quicken his plans. Zetsu came up out of the ground behind him. Where's the Nine Tails? About half a day's travel to the north of Konoha. Uchiha smiled beneath his mask. It seems his bad luck was coming to an end. He grabbed onto Broly's shoulder and the two disappeared in a kamui. Barry appeared where Zetsu told them, and it was but a few moments' effort for him to locate the concentration of strong shinobi traveling through the forest. He looked to Broly and gestured towards the Konohan Inn. Go forth and bring me the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The Saiyan leapt high into the sky in search of his prey. He saw them within seconds of leaving the masked man behind. Anxiety ate away at him once he spotted the one with blonde hair. Broly floated down in front of the group in despair. There was the child who he had reached out to. The only one who had an inkling of the hell he was in. Capturing him as Madara commanded would result in the boy's death and his hopes would be dashed away. Even if he didn't capture the blonde, who's to say his compassion wouldn't diminish in the face of any of his friends' deaths? Madara wouldn't let him pull punches against unimportant targets. Only he can fly one of them, the pink girl yelled. The group immediately jumped back and gave him plenty of distance. Keen eyes there? He thought sarcastically as he slipped off the top of the robes he wore. It felt unnatural to fight with clothing on his torso. Naruto pointed at him, the recognition in his eyes evident. You're the one who killed Gaara. Several pairs of eyes glanced at the knucklehead in worry. They all knew how the whiskered teen had been handling his grief. The son of Paragus noted how one girl's blank eyes lingered on longer than the others. Probably a lover or a particularly close friend compared to the rest. He'd have to try to be careful with her. Madara, hidden among the foliage, was amused by the Jinchuriki's outburst. The boy was emotional already, and not a fist has been flung. Capturing him would be simple. Kakashi tensed up as he remembered what Tsunade said when he reported what Naruto told him after the failure of the Kazukiage retrieval mission. You realize the implications of what you're telling me here, right? Tsunade eyed him like a hawk over her joined hands. One of the most powerful shinobi to have ever lived is not only still alive, but involved with the Akatsuki and directly controlling one of its members, if what Naruto says is believed to be true. Kakashi could only nod. Her skepticism was completely expected, hell he didn't fully believe himself, but Naruto simply wasn't one to lie. Until we have proof of this information is to only be disseminated when absolutely necessary. And if we are to encounter this Akatsuki again? She paused for a few moments. Capture him if you can. If you see Madara, flee on sight. No exceptions. Alright everyone, change of plans. The copy nin revealed his Sharingan. Our priority is to subdue the Akatsuki. The shinobi around him look at him in shock. Kiba was the first to recover. Wait, what about Itachi? Kakashi gave the feral teen a look that demanded no arguments. I'll explain later. Broly brought forth his immeasurable strength, and the air around them became weighted with toxicity. Trees fell in the wake of the winds being generated, and boulders cracked from the pressure. The Saiyan smiled, which sent chills down everyone's spines. Sai stood with a bored expression on his face. The only indication that he acknowledged the alien's display was a tighter grip on his sword's hilt. The rest got into various martial arts stances or grabbed weapons from their pouches. Yamato spoke up with no fear allowed in his voice. Is that supposed to scare us? The son of Paragus held out his fist. Kakashi noticed the shining green light filtering through the man's fingers. The hand opened to reveal a pea-sized orb of emerald charka. That didn't look right. His Sharingan couldn't process what it was seeing. Take my power. Naruto wanted to argue against the Kyuubi, but he remembered how the last fight against this man went. He stood defiant against the brainwashed Nuke Nin, with the red hue of the Kyuubi's chakra bubbling up around him. I will, but this doesn't mean anything. Of course. Hinata chimed in, her voice trembling. That isn't chakra he's gathering. The orb detonated and everything turned green. Yamato coughed against the wall of wood he summoned at the last possible moment. The former Anbu looked over at his allies and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that his constructs had stood firm. Is everything okay? He yelled as he did a head count. Everyone was here. Get down. Yelled the Hyuga as Yamato's wall exploded around him. He turned in time to see an arm slam into his chest. Broly tossed another Kai blast as the man he clotheslined bounced away. Sakura came up and crashed her fist against the ground. A block of stone rose up to meet the attack head-on. The Pincat as well as the two men behind her were blown away as the shield of rock failed to absorb the entirety of the impact. They grabbed onto a set of claws that aimed to take his head. A snarling face, draped in crimson, came up behind the limb. If what you said is true, fight it. Naruto yelled as he raised his free hand. The son of Paragus backhanded the child away. As if it would be so simple to just break free of the masked man's influence. What the hell did he think Broly was doing? Twiddling his thumbs. He was beset on both sides by Kiba and Akamaru with their fang-over-fang technique. The living drills bit into his skin, and it hurt more than he'd like. As the Saiyan swiped at his current aggressors, Shino summoned a massive swarm of his insects. Hinata, follow after my insects. Why? It will distract him from your strikes. Right. She said, her words far more confident than she felt. Her Byakugan was on and focus on this singular target, but what she saw simply couldn't be possible. What little chakra he had was concentrated on his skin, and there were no chakra points to speak of. Pathways were there, but they were far too thick and too few. She wasn't sure if her gentle fist could do anything to this man. Hinata raced off as Shino sent his swarm at the Akatsuki, who just freed himself of their teammate. His body was covered and he struggled against the bugs that ate away at his energy. The Hyuga noticed how some of them dropped dead after a few mere bites. A hole in the swarm opened over the man's abdomen. Her fingertips lit up with power as she prepared to deliver the crippling blow. She lashed out and it felt she slammed her fingers into a steel wall. Her chakra, meant to slice through the man, was swallowed by whatever flowed through the Akatsuki's system. Naruto screamed. Hinata. So in shock was she that she failed to react in time to stop the hand from clamping down on her head. The pain was incredible and she screamed. Broly lifted the Kunoichi up to eye level. Puny girl. It was only for a moment that he held her, but it felt like a lifetime of thought went into that moment. First off, he could speak, which means at least one of the attacks that had hit him actually affected the control Madara had on him. More importantly, it was only a matter of time until Madara saw something was off. How he was going to talk to the blonde kid without him knowing this time around was going to be tough with the masked man watching. Secondly, it was clear he cared for this girl on some level, so he had to avoid killing her to ensure that the brat would still help him. Actually, to be safe, he had to avoid killing anyone. His Saiyan blood cursed him for deciding on such a course of action, but he reasoned that once he was free, he would take his time turning every inch of this world's surface to glass and cinder. Third, what the hell were these bugs doing to him? He could feel his Kai draining from him. Were they eating his energy? It seemed that way. He forced his body to merely flick his wrist and send the girl away, instead of crushing her skull. Madara wasn't the only one figuring out the control on his mind. During the many sessions, he had figured out that he could influence the actions of his body if his desires were near enough to what he was supposed to do. In this case, getting rid of the girl was the objective. He simply tweaked it so that she wasn't ridden of permanently. He hated how much thought had to go in every movement. These creatures were so fragile that it was entirely possible for him to break even their strongest without the slightest effort, but here he was desperately holding back for salvation's sake. Her body cracked the trunk of some tree. A burst of power emanated from Broly, and the insects on his person were blown off. The majority of the parasitic bugs fell to the ground dead, while the rest returned to Shino. A blur of pink came across his vision. A sharp pain erupted from his jaw as the Saiyan flew through a good quarter-mile of forest. As the son of Paragus picked himself up, Kakashi and Sakura appeared in front of him with Kiba, Shino, and Sai landing behind him. The group looked worse for wear in spite of how little combat they had been through. The copy Nin put his hands together in a seal. Surrender. Broly leapt at them, his predatory grin striking fear into them. As the remnants of Team 7 prepared their counter-attack, an ear-splitting roar tore through the forest. Sakura, distracted by such a terrible sound, moved her head at the last possible moment. The man's fist sliced at the flesh of her cheek before it utterly destroyed the tree behind her. As she created distance from him, the earth began to shake. Kakashi forewent the jutsu he was planning and brandished a kunai. Truth was he was not intending to use it, he just hoped it would grab the Akatsuki's attention. Sai and Shino were planning something, and Kiba looked like he was waiting for a proper opening. There was also that roar. He could feel the chakra of the nine tails ebbing and flowing around him. Yamato must be preoccupied with Naruto. Just like he wanted, Broly turned to him. He is here. What? The copy Nin, having not heard the Akatsuki's earlier words, was not prepared for the man to talk. The temporary shock cost him as what felt like a log slammed into his chest. A smoke bomb hit the ground at the Saiyan's feet and a large cloud instantly consumed him. He heard something about a transformation, but that was drowned out by a loud howl. Will Fang over Fang. What could only be described as the worst back massage in the world hit Broly. The force of the drill behind him forced the Saiyan into the dirt. The attack abruptly stopped and the son of Paragus had to suppress a groan when the two-headed wolf on his back jumped off. Looks like a certain dog was up for euthanasia today. 3 large tigers landed around the Saiyan, their skins constantly shifting like the surface of a lake. The ink constructs jumped Broly, but the Saiyan tore them apart with ease. What he didn't appreciate was the mass of bugs that poured out of the things onto him. It was so tempting to just shout and rage at them, but Madara couldn't find out he could talk. Not until he made certain these people would help him out. The shinobi around him froze as a wave of malicious chakra overwhelmed their senses. We should move. Why? Naruto is heading this way. A few minutes before. You alright? Yamato nodded at Sakura as she took her green palm from his chest. The Akatsuki hit like a train. The Pinkette's head snapped away when the impact of Hinata's body rang out. Her voice quaked. Oh no. The Kunoichi ran at the man and slammed her fist into his face. She looked back at Yamato before glancing over at Naruto, who was still recovering from Broly's backhand. The Anbu nodded his understanding. The blonde was already drawing on the fox's power. There was no telling what would happen when he witnessed the Hyuga's condition. The forest around them cleared as the rest of the shinobi went after the Akatsuki. The Anbu quickly stopped by the Hyuga to check her out. Her pulse was strong, but it was clear she would need some time before she would wake up. Hinata. Shit. Yamato quickly went through the seal to suppress the Nine Tails chakra. An out-of-control Jinchuriki was the last thing they needed right now. The anger that flashed across Naruto's face scared the elder shinobi. It was common knowledge among his peers how the blonde had been faring since the Kazukiya's death, and there were rumors abound how the Kyuubi would corrupt him in his vulnerable state. Those words whispered in shadows seemed to hold the weight of the world in that moment. The geyser of evil, red chakra erupted from the young ninja, and Yamato had to create another wall of wood to protect both himself and Hinata. A deafening roar hurt his ears. It was now or never. The blonde skin was burned away, and a blood-red shroud covered him. He finished the seals and slammed his hands on the ground. Hokage-style Elder Jutsu. 10th Edict on Enlightenment. 10 spiked wooden pillars came forth from the ground around Naruto as 4 tails grew behind him. Forcing the wall of wood away, Yamato held out his hand and a stream of chakra connected his palm to Naruto's forehead. The aura of burning chakra dimmed under his influence, but what remained was strong. The fox fought hard against him, but he returned it in full force. It was a tug of war with their wills against one another, but it was a matter of time before one won out. And, unfortunately for the Leaf Anbu, it was the Kyuubi's victory. The skeleton of bone manifested onto Naruto's form as 2 more tail emerged. The first Hokage's necklace, a key component to suppressing the 9 tails, was shattered in the tailed beast's paw. Yamato was shaking as the pure malevolence of the raging monster was directed at him. The thing that was Naruto stalked forward. The Anbu put himself between it and Hinata. It was pointless considering that it could wipe him out in an instant, but he could not die knowing he didn't do everything he could to ensure another shinobi's life. Naruto swiped at him too fast, and he was knocked away with ease. The last thing Yamato saw before unconsciousness took him was Fox reaching forward to move Hinata. When she didn't react, a piercing roar erupted from Naruto before he turned and rushed through the forest. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control. Madara was watching them. Naruto's self-control had all but disappeared, and it was clear that Broly clearly had the edge in raw power over them all. Continuing the mission will result in failure or death. They had to retreat. Sasuke wasn't worth this. That still left the question of how to deal with the Akatsuki. It stood to reason that the man was susceptible to Genjutsu if what they knew of the Nuke Nin was true. With his Sharingan, it would be simple to put the man down. But with Madara's own technique in the way, it would be risky to potentially put the Uchiha on high alert. The only way the Uchiha would be so hands-off right now was because the man had full confidence in his slave. Then there was Naruto unleashing the Nine Tails. It would be moments before he was on top of them. I probably only have one shot at this before Madara steps in. With that thought in mind, Kakashi forcibly morphed his eye into the Mangekyo state. It would take a lot out of him, but a Genjutsu with the Mangekyo was his best shot. As the son of Paragus picked himself up, Kakashi appeared in front of him, his own red eye blazing. As their eyes met, the world around Broly melted away. The two stood in front of each other in an endless void with confusion running rampant in the Saiyan. "What did you do?" the ancient warrior asked as he looked down at his freely moving body with wide eyes. Kakashi was wondering the same thing. An outside influence stopped him from putting any detail in the illusionary world he had created. An eerie sense of guilt seemed to pass through him as if the void itself was apologizing. Broly's mind was racing. This whole thing was clearly a fuck-up, but it was a fuck-up he had to exploit. Broly took several steps forward. "Look, listen. I'm actually being." Kakashi leapt back with a kunai drawn defensively. The Saiyan snarled. "I'm not in control of my actual body. Some asshole named Madara along with his freak friends are keeping me under their heel." Some of the tension left the copy nin's body, but he was still ready for any altercation. Who knows how else his Genjutsu was affected? Who are you and why would Madara control you like he is now? There's plenty of other high-level missing nin to choose from. The Saiyan's fists clenched but he held his tongue. Whatever happened to these hero types just helping, no questions asked. Broly and I wouldn't have joined him otherwise. Kakashi's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Why would a man like Madara go through the trouble of coercing someone through Genjutsu when the entirety of the Akatsuki were involved out of their own volition? It wasn't adding up. Broly's hands grabbed at his hair in frustration. Why? Why couldn't things just go his way? This bastard was going to waste all the time he had in here. Damn it. I don't know how to explain this. Maybe the truth. It's not like he believes him now. I'm stronger than you could ever conceive, but some old bastard got me when I was half dead. Next thing I know, I wake up and some masked fuck has complete control over me. Sorry if I don't find your testimony that convincing. Broly pointed at the man as if doing so could better direct his fury. I could have killed everyone in your team if I let it happen. How dare this waste of breath even consider that he wanted to be here? To suffer such constant humiliation. You're alive because I thought you could help me. The colorless void began to crack open. Wisps of red smoke poured through the opening. The Kyuubi's influence was corroding this fragile reality. As the illusion faded, so did Broly's anger give way. So help me. The two were suddenly pulled from their shared world back into reality. Only a moment had passed in the real world for all the time they spent in the failed Genjutsu. Kakashi could feel fatigue setting in, and he returned the Mangekyo to its normal state. He would need to conserve his chakra if he wanted to survive Broly, Naruto, and potentially Madara. Broly quickly leapt to his feet, the bugs on his body forgotten. The fear in the shinobi could be tasted. "Sakura, go back and find Yamato and Hinata. They'll need healing." The Pinket nodded nervously as she jumped into the trees. She'd have to be careful to avoid Naruto, but something told her that any healing couldn't wait. Everybody else, pull back. As the words left his mouth, the forest seemingly exploded. Kakashi covered his eyes with his arm to block the debris that flew his way. He looked over his forearm. There stood across the seemingly innocent Akatsuki a great beast of crimson skin and pale bone with 6 slowly twitching tails. With no desire for theatrics, the two dashed at each other. Broly's momentum was reversed instantly as the 6-tailed fox tackled him into the forest. The copy nin looked around and did a head count. Much to his surprise, everybody was accounted for. "Kakashi, what do you suggest for our next course of action?" Sai asked as he regrouped on the Jonin's position alongside Kiba, Akamaru, and Shino. He appeared completely unperturbed by their circumstances. Kiba made a disgusted face as the smell of the Nine Tails chakra wafted past his nose. The toxic nature of the stuff was present even then. I don't know about you, but I really don't want to get in between those two. Neither do I, Kiba. Agreed Shino as he pushed his glasses back up his nose. He had already lost the majority of his hive and there was nothing to show for it. There was hardly a scratch on the Akatsuki. Why? None of us are equipped to deal with a tailed beast, much less the practical equivalent of two. They had all heard how the last fight went between Broly and Naruto went. The Akatsuki stood toe-to-toe with a four-tailed variant of the Kyuubi, with Naruto on the losing end. Kakashi nodded. He had to agree with that assessment. I'm calling off the mission. We need to get Yamato so we can suppress the Nine Tails chakra. With the Kyuubi running loose, it's safe to assume that Yamato failed to do so earlier. The painter met eyes with the copy nin. How do we ensure success this time around? We'll cross that bridge soon enough. Find the others. I'll stay behind to keep an eye on Naruto. The three shinobi dispersed after a unanimous "hi." So this is what it feels like to be on the other side. The crimson monster held him up in its hands. He was scratched and had a busted lip from the extended beating it just unleashed on him, but he was still breathing, so he had that going for him. The burning substance that made its body seeped into his wounds and his body was racked with pain. Its jaw opened, bones shifting and cracking to increase the size of its maw, and Broly internally cringed. There was no way in hell he was going to be eaten. He lifted his arms, the limbs tearing through the paws that held him, and the Saiyan reached out as it clamped down. Sharp teeth dug into the palms of his hands as the son of Paragus refused his potential fate. His leg came up into the thing's head. The bone was much harder than anticipated as it actually hurt his shin, but his kick got the job done. Naruto bounded along the earth for a couple hundred feet before digging in its reformed paws into the ground. It swiped his follow-up Kai blast into the sky with ease. The sky turned green for a brief moment as the attack exploded. It reciprocated with a volley of tailed beast balls that the Saiyan struggled to keep up with. The edges of his cloak were singed as he narrowly dodged the constructs of chakra. He could feel the hold on his mind loosening as more of the substance got on him. He closed the distance once more. With the power he had been allowed, the long-range game didn't look to be the one he should play. He rammed into the Biju and hoisted it onto his shoulder. The impromptu battering ram was used to great effect on half a dozen trees and several boulders before the son of Paragus tossed him away. Broly fell to his knees. He was in agony. The seeping red that fell off of Naruto onto him seemed to be cooking him alive. He had the raw strength to beat back the brat, but that stuff was simply crippling. Naruto stood back on his forelegs, his tails reaching above the canopy of the forest. He breathed in and let loose a roar that shook the very ground for miles. The legendary Super Saiyan returned the intimidating gesture with one of his own by powering up to the very limit of his allowed power. The ground at his feet cratered and the man floated in the midst of a green barrier. His skin screamed at him to just stop moving, but that wasn't an option. I know I don't want to kill him, but is neutering still an option? You son of a bitch. Kiba no. The feral teen jumped at him in a wild fury. Why waste such emotion on a pet? Doesn't he know they're replaceable? Madara didn't dwell on the question as he flicked his clawed hand up and slashed the ninja's throat with ease. He was here for one thing and that was the girl. Calming down the Nine Tails Jinchuriki would make him easy pickings. He jumped around in fake joy as the leaf shinobi died at his feet. The remaining four looked at him in fear. Well, three. The fourth one just stared really. Oh no. He's dead. Toby reached up and grabbed at his hair in horror. But we just started playing. Hinata's teary eyes widened with terror as Kiba drew his last breath mere moments after Shino. She wanted to lash out, to cry to the heavens above in despair at the injustice she just witnessed, but she knew how pointless that would be. It would just add another body. Her knees felt weak. She could hear Sakura's fists clench. What do you want, Akatsuki? None of us are Jinchuriki. Yamato asked as he subtly gathered chakra. This Akatsuki seemed more unstable than the others. The spiral masked man either failed to notice the preparation or simply didn't care. I got bored watching Mr. Broly have all the fun. Now it's my turn. A shapeless mass of red and green ripped through the forest. There was no purpose to the movement, no pattern to follow, just chaos given form. Fires erupted from the heat of the conflict of colors, and any life in the way was swiftly ended. Its momentum was interrupted as Broly suddenly planted himself into the ground. When the Kyuubi hit him, he grabbed onto its chest and, with a great heave, flipped the beast over his head. The Saiyan landed on its abdomen. He lifted a fist, and his whole limb was awash with Kai. His eyes were glowing with the toxic power, and the seals on his body were the color of the fox below him. They seemed to be struggling to hold his power back. Naruto roared as his fist crashed down into the shinobi's chest. He brought it back up and brought it down again. The roar shifted to a cry of pain as the Saiyan repeated the action over and over. Each time, his knuckles rent the blood cloak further until he saw the blonde's enraged face. Broly wrapped his fingers around the brat's visage. Some deep-rooted part of him wanted to keep going. It wouldn't be satisfied until this thing underneath him was just a puddle of red. The parted chakra clamped down around his arm and a new agony raced up Broly's arm. Why did this hurt so much? He was slapped away by the Kyuubi. A half-mile of trees were flattened by his rag-dulling body. The son of Paragus struggled to hold back his need to just yell to the heavens. What was going through his head back there? He was just wailing on the kid with no regard to his life. It was like something was stopping him from thinking, forcing instinct and bloodlust to override his wants. He looked at his arm and the sight nauseated him. There were patches of skin, small but numerous, where the top layer of skin was gone. This stuff, it could actually kill him if he wasn't careful. Broly turned, floating into the air as he did so. The monster was making its way towards him. He charged at it with a wild abandon and his arm poised to rip through the beast. Rip through he did as his fist collided with its beating face. The head of the Kyuubi was cleaved in two only for one of the halves to rapidly develop into a second upper half of the body. His shock prevented him from avoiding the hold it took on his arms. Another pair of arms grabbed at his legs and they began to pull. He could feel the vertebra in his spine slowly being stretched apart. It was far from a pleasant feeling. He powered through the pull on his limbs and tore through the vices that held him. Broly twisted in the air and unleashed a torrent of force with Kai that sent the monster flying away. The Saiyan picked up a nearby boulder and launched a projectile at the prone form of the fox. It let out a groan as it was crushed underneath the stone mass. The son of Paragus began floating upwards. Why didn't he think of an air-to-ground battle earlier? It wasn't like this thing could fly. Though it felt cowardly to just retreat to the air after utterly failing in a head-to-head confrontation. It seemed to sense his intentions as it instantly sought cover into the forest when it tossed off the rock. He started lobbing dozens of energy blasts at the red that darted in between trees. Without fail, it moved out of the way at the last instant. Trees were turned to ash by the tens and unharmed ground was quickly becoming a rarity. The beast below returned the airstrike with its own tailed beast balls. An eerie, high-pitched whine followed each of the red spheres as they converged on the Saiyan. It was clear to see that at this level of power, the Kyuubi below had the advantage when it came to just dodging, as Broly had to start slapping them away seconds into the onslaught. There was just too many and he was struggling to move as it was. He raised his barrier for the sake of having a moment to breath, but it was cracked right open by just 3 of these pseudo-Kai blasts. The son of Paragus growled as he raised his hands above his head. He roared as he forced the majority of the Kai in his body into his hands. There was no way it could dodge an attack of this magnitude. Down below, Kakashi was struggling to survive the onslaught. He wasn't even the target and it was near impossible to consistently dodge the explosions. When Naruto retaliated, he gave himself a moment to breath. If this continued, his team could get hurt and that was simply unacceptable. The copy nin pulled out a kunai and slapped a flashbang seal onto the handle. If the Akatsuki could be blinded, maybe Naruto could knock him out of the sky. He felt a pang of guilt as he aimed the projectile. It looked like the brainwashed man was going for scorched earth if the orb above his head indicated anything. While he empathized with the man, his life wasn't worth a shinobi under his command. His aim was true, and Broly was blinded by a sudden flash of light in front of his eyes. With no means of seeing the attack coming, the Saiyan was shot out of the sky when a barrage of tailed beast balls slammed into him. The Saiyan fell from the sky, the smoke from his body leaving a trail behind him. The raven-haired man fell back first through the treetops and hit the ground with an earth-shattering crash. The pain in his arm was no longer an issue, as that agony had spread through the rest of his being. It was clear to him that Madara hadn't given him enough power to beat whatever that brat had become. He was lucky that his extraordinary durability was a thing. It was a struggle to lift himself out of the imprint he had left in the ground, but he managed. Broly stumbled around for a way out of the forest. Damn the consequences, he needed to live so he could destroy this hell of a world. The Saiyan stopped mid-journey in astonishment. He was completely disregarding the masked man's orders to fight. An evil grin broke out on his face. If he exhausted what was left of his power, there should be more than enough to turn this whole forest to a smooth meadow of stone. A crazed laugh escaped him. "I've beaten you, Madara." Meanwhile, Kakashi had returned his full attention to the Kyuubi. It was just standing there, waiting for the Akatsuki to show himself again. After a good minute had passed, it seemed satisfied as it did a full 180 and ran off to where it came from. What the hell is he doing now? The copy nin followed his former student with haste. The rest of his team was in that direction. He could only hope he could reach them in time. Sora narrowly dodged another set of claws that threatened to take her head off. She kicked at the ground, the force launching her away while forcing a wall of rock between herself and Toby. It was all a game of survival at this point. Nothing they did seemed to even touch the guy. At first, they thought him an illusion, but Hinata confirmed that there was no trace of any genjutsu. This man was real. Oh man. You're good at tag. Real annoying. She thought in frustration as Yamato landed next to her. His breathing was heavy. He was getting tired. They all were. Got any ideas on how to stop him? She shook her head. Nothing, you. I wouldn't be asking if I did. She asked about that. You got me there. On the other side of the masked weirdo, Sai prepared more of his ink constructs while Hinata brought up her twin lion fists. A fresh trio of blazing red cuts adorned the right side of her face. I take it you do not feel any negative effects from your injuries. The Hyuga shook her head. If those weapons were coated in anything, she would have felt it by now. I don't think his claws are poisoned. As she spoke, the masked man seemingly fell into the ground with a quick exclamation of "Wee." He popped up between her and Sai. Surprise. He slashed at the artist who fell back to avoid the blow. While he avoided any injury, his shirt was shredded by the sharp blades. Hinata moved the instant the ground beneath her shook. Her chakra-infused fist roared like the predators they imitated. She was actually hopeful that she would make contact with the Akatsuki so as to extract what little revenge she could for her teammate's death. Her hopes disappeared as her hand merely passed through the strange shinobi like every single one before it. The Hyuga fell forward as her balance was thrown off. A vice grip on her throat stopped her descent and her breath left her. As she struggled to get the hand choking her off, Toby gasped. Whoa. You almost fell there. With her Byakugan active, the malice beneath his playful Sharingan was clear. To say that was a surprising discovery was an understatement. Was this Akatsuki a living Ichihara thief with stolen eyes? Her thoughts were interrupted as he leapt into the air with her in tow. There was a sharp pain in her neck from suddenly having all of her weight focused on the fragile organ. Toby dangled her above her worried friends below. Hinata had never felt so pathetic before. Even after all the effort she put into training, it was like the attempted kidnapping by Kumo all over again. Helpless against someone far superior to her. Tears welled up in her vision as all the grief and shame caught up to her oxygen-deprived brain. Sakura impotently shook her fist at the man. Don't you dare hurt her or I swear I'll rip you limb from limb. Oh, don't be sad. Maybe you'll win the next game of tag. Thunder erupted from the forest and Toby struggled to stay balanced on the tree limb he was on. Whoa ho ho. Looks like the beast is looking for his beauty. A six-tailed Kyuubi ripped through one of the gargantuan trees as it halted in front of the ongoing stalemate. He looked at each of them before focusing its gaze on Toby. The beast stepped forward and its paw shook the very earth. The masked man pulled Hinata back and wagged his finger at the animal. Leader tells me you don't get anywhere fast angry. Up above, Broly looked below. He saw them all and, most importantly, he saw Madara. He let his burning hatred for the man overwhelm him. He would want every little ounce of his strength. Not because he truly needed it, but because he wanted to make sure that every little bit of the son of a bitch was gone is the most absolute sense of the word. The Saiyan lifted his hands and, like matter in a vacuum, the energy within him rushed out to fill the space in between his palms. A great burning ball of Kai formed above him, its light eclipsing that of the sun above. He could feel just how weak this blast would leave him. The fall from this height could possibly even kill him with how little of his power would be left. But the possibility of his death was worth the guarantee of Madara's. Madara's grip tightened in anger, and the girl let out a gasp. What is he doing? The Kyuubi didn't like that as it roared at him. His cloak waved along in the winds generated by the outburst. Kakashi burst through the foliage to join the remaining leaf nin. The still bodies of Kiba, Akamaru, and Shino stopped him cold. Guilt gripped him where he stood. Yet more shinobi he had failed to protect. Kakashi. He was pulled from his spiral into shame by Sakura, whose fear was as plain as day on her face. What's going on? The copy nin looked at the emerald sun that had formed above them. Whatever that energy was, there was so much of it. The scale of it was hard to comprehend, but he had a feeling that if Broly let go of it. We need to retreat. Interrupted Sai with his usual monotone. I have little doubt that that attack will be one of immense scale. Kakashi's fists clenched. There's no time. The Jonin replied. The Nine Tails was the first to react as half a dozen arms, each one with a hand capable of crushing a man, erupted from its torso towards the Saiyan. Broly threw his attack downwards, and it tore through several of the appendages. A dome of wood formed around the leaf shinobi in an instant to their surprise. Yamato nearly collapsed from the exertion. I don't know if this'll be enough. The Saiyan above them all laughed maniacally as the dark rushed in on the edges of his vision. The Nine Tails caught his limp body in a crushing grip and ripped him from the sky. The air around the blast warped halfway down before the green Kai suddenly disappeared. A distance away, a dome of utter annihilation leveled a dozen miles of forest in an instant. Madara was utterly livid. How? How did the Saiyan get off the leash? He spent days of his time perfecting his genjutsu to prevent such a thing. The girl in his hand went limp. The Kyuubi slammed the alien into the ground between them. His slave had seen better days. He had time to be angry later. A wrong move now would lose him an asset. Hold on there, little foxy. Toby grabbed her by the wrist with his free hand and let go of her neck. He held her unconscious body out like one would a fresh kill on a hunt. If you kill him, you can't get her back. It stilled for a moment before it tilted its head. Want to trade? I kinda prefer my partner. He poked Hinata with a shrug. She's not the liveliest person around. Toby tossed a Hyuga before he kami'd towards Broly and grabbed the injured Akatsuki. See ya. He disappeared as the fox reached out to catch the girl. The six-tailed form of the fox quickly lowered her to the ground, unable to prevent the contact burns of its hands on her body. The Kyuubi looked down at the unconscious form of the Hyuga and its red cloak began to fall away. He tossed the unmoving body into the closest tree with little care. He was too fucking angry to think about the Saiyan getting further injuries. Broly broke through his control. An angry, walking extinction event slipped from his grasp. It was merely good fortune that he was too exhausted to do anything after his attempt at murdering him. Madara paced back and forth in thought. Was Broly really worth all of this headache? Not once, had the alien ever been a benefit. On paper, he was the ultimate boon, but in practice. A free victory for the enemy in essence. That had to change. There just had to be something he was missing. The Sage of Six Paths wrote of his powers in fear, and he'll be damned to let slip such a weapon. What is it? He asked out loud to himself. What is the key to making you work? He needed to reread the sage's tablet again. There must be a clue hidden in the stone's words somewhere. Madara felt Zetsu pop up behind him. Impeccable timing, Zetsu. Sasuke has killed his brother. He almost forgot about that. He looked back at Broly once more. Gather Sasuke and Itachi's eyes. I have matters to attend to first. The plant-like man seemed to sense his great irritation and complied without the black half's usual snark. I will figure you out, Saiyan. So, Broly failed to kill Madara, Madara kept losing, and the Leaf has suffered devastating losses. Just a shit situation for everyone involved really. Based on the way his techniques affected and damaged the environment, we can reasonably assume it was by his, Broly's, hand that the settlements around Fire Country had been annihilated. Tsunade let out a deep breath as the Anbu concluded his report. There was that mystery solved at least even if it wouldn't assuage the villagers. With the reports of small towns seemingly vanishing overnight, it had driven the Leaf citizens into a frenzy of panic and despair. There was even a riot the day before though that was quickly quelled. She dismissed the shinobi with a quick wave of her hand. The Akatsuki had to be taken care of much quicker if only to keep her village from ripping itself apart. A door suddenly opened which pulled her out of her thoughts. Jiraiya and Naruto stepped through the door with grim faces. It seems the few days the young blonde had off did nothing for him, which meant letting him know of their future plans for Sasuke was not going to be pretty. Their last excursion resulted in the deaths of 2 clan heirs, and needless to say their clans were not happy. They lost the strongest of their next generation in an attempt to bring back a missing nin, specifically at the request of Naruto. They had volunteered for the mission, but that didn't matter. Tempers flared extremely high, and, were she a worse leader, it might have resulted in conflict. In the end, they were able to make a deal. Sasuke was to be officially considered a missing nin, and future attempts to retrieve him were not to be made. Only execution was acceptable. Her brow rose when she saw who was trailing behind them. Hinata. I didn't ask for you. Jiraiya grunted as the Hyuga looked away in slight embarrassment. The brat wouldn't leave her alone, so I just brought them both along. The Hokage looked over the younger ninja, but seeing as they weren't forthcoming with the reasoning, she left it alone. Hinata, she started with a sigh. You can't be here for this. The Kunoichi straightened up and nodded at her. Hi, Hokage-sama. She could see the relief in the poor girl's eyes as she turned to leave. Naruto reached out however and prevented her from leaving. Tsunade glanced at Jiraiya with a questioning look, but the sage seemed unsurprised. It seemed that she should have kept a closer eye on the kid in the last few days. No, she stays. Said the Jinchuriki defiantly. His eyes dared her to insist otherwise. Hinata looked in a slight panic between him and the Hokage. Naruto, it's okay she whispered to him, but he seemingly ignored her. The Hokage was taken aback by the overprotectiveness that Naruto exhibited over the girl. She knew things hadn't gone as planned, but it seemed that the reports might have downplayed how badly the young man had been affected. For the sake of preventing any future problems, the Hokage relented. Once Naruto was done with the sage training, he was going directly to counseling to help him deal with his issues. Fine, but not a word of this leaves this room for the time being, is that clear? The two nodded. Tsunade's eyes lingered on the young blondes for a few moments longer. Neither of them were going to enjoy the next few minutes. Naruto, I called you so I could personally tell you that as of today, the village will no longer support your endeavor to bring back Sasuke. She was prepared for the possibility, but the brazen manner in which Naruto slammed his hands onto her desk was still irksome. The speed at which he crossed the room astounded her, however. Not the fastest she'd seen, but it was up there. The brat was strong. His crimson eyes bored into hers. What do you mean we can't bring him back? He belongs here. His nails-turned claws bit into the wood of her desk, and the splintering could be heard by everyone in the room. There's good in him, Grandma, I know it. Setting aside the usual irritation from the nickname he gave her, Tsunade leaned back in her chair if only for some distance. The anger in his visage was not a pleasant sight. It looked so out of place on the young man, like a puddle in the middle of the desert. Her mouth felt dried. As much as I hate to say it, it doesn't matter what you believe, Naruto. The clan heads, while understanding the risks their children take in this line of work, were not pleased to find out their children's lives were wasted trying to return a missing nin back to the village, based on the desires of his former friend. Fissures appeared in the desk as Naruto squeezed further. The Jinchuriki's head lowered and his bangs hid his eyes. Tsunade looked past him. Hinata looked incredibly awkward if sympathetic to the blonde. Jiraiya continued to look grim. They weren't wasted. She wanted to stand up and put a hand to his shoulders, hug him even, but in this she had to be professional. It didn't matter that she looked to him much like a grandchild, and seeing him in pain pulled at her heart. She settled for laying a hand on one of his own. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied. I can't risk losing the clans, not with the Akatsuki still out there. His head lifted slightly, his pupils blue but wet, but she could see hope. Tsunade couldn't help but suspect that the next thing out of Naruto's mouth would be uncomfortable to answer. So if the Akatsuki were gone, we could bring him back. She pulled her hand away. I don't think so, but I can't say for sure. He pushed off the desk and balled his fists. She did a quick once-over of the piece of furniture. It needed to be replaced, which was time and effort that could be spent on better things. Were it anyone else. Then I'll just kill them all. Shino and Kiba's lives will be avenged, and the clan heads will have no choice but to let me bring Sasuke back. Tsunade exchanged a swift glance with Jiraiya. That was a dangerous sentiment to hear from anyone, much less the container of the strongest tailed beast in the world. The Toad Sage's training better work. On the topic of killing Akatsuki, there is a second purpose to bringing you here today. She gestured to the spy master. Jiraiya, if you may. As the sage moved forward, Hinata found herself hoping for the wall behind her to swallow her up. There was no point to having her here, and it felt like she was intruding more than anything else. It's not like her personal feelings matter when it was her crush that asked her to stay. In spite of her feeling nearly paralyzed by the circumstances, she found butterflies raging in her stomach when he grabbed onto her like he did. She remembered the first time she woke up after the mission. He was there by her bedside alongside her cousin, Niji, and her sister, Hanabi. Given what she knew of the blonde, she wasn't too surprised that the medical personnel couldn't stop him from sitting in the room despite not being family. Of the ones who survived, she was the most injured, with severe chakra poisoning from Naruto becoming the Nine Tails. It was apparently touch and go, because when she finally woke up, it was a pretty intense experience for her. Naruto and Hanabi asked a million questions, while Niji just stood behind them with a pleased smile. From there, things quickly devolved. The attention she had so craved became suffocating, and she was rarely allowed a moment to herself. She found it hard to even properly grieve for her teammates with Naruto constantly around. He had been slowly losing control since Gaara, and the mission was the last straw. Now it seemed he protected her to get back that sense of control. It was worrying. Naruto looked up at the older ninja. Hervey Sage. The older man frowned. Alright, brat, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You need to get stronger, and I need you to stop losing your mind at the slightest thing. Jiraiya crossed his arms. Even she winced at the harsh way he spoke. It seemed that the Sannin lacked the patience she did regarding Naruto. I'm taking you to Mount Mamboku for sage training. Naruto's eyes widened at the news. Really? Jiraiya nodded. The shinobi grinned and grabbed her hands. She didn't even notice him cross the room. You hear that, Hinata? We're going to Mount Mamboku. Her brows furrowed. That was odd wording on his part, but she chalked it up to the excitement of becoming stronger. She could use a breather from the blonde's attentions, because surely he didn't mean the two of them. Did he? You better mean me and you, kid. Naruto's eyes turned red again. Broly woke up to darkness and chains. He was stuck back in his own mind. He wanted to scream and tear at his bindings, but he knew it was a wasted endeavor as soon as he thought of it. The cool breeze passed by him. It felt nice even if it wasn't real. Oh, how he'd love to lay in the sun in his real body once again. As his gout sunk into the memories of his brief time of freedom in his youth, a nagging thought bothered the Saiyan. This place doesn't have wind. Or temperature if he really thought about it. The footsteps of someone approaching him rang out behind him, and the man turned around as much as he could, but there was no one. This place was driving him mad. That had to be the only explanation. He was feeling and hearing things that weren't there. He swore he's seen things moving in the darkest reaches of his prison too. I'll have a broken mind before I get out of here, I swear. Let's avoid that if we can. Broly's heart practically jumped out of his chest at the voice, and he began frantically searching for whoever was talking. He felt the amusement of whatever was talking to him more than felt it. What the hell was going on? Otherwise my efforts would be wasted. The Saiyan saw movement directly in front of him. A figure emerged and his eyes widened at what he witnessed. It was him, but not entirely. It was his face, his hair, but his clothes and his eyes were an exact copy of the old man he fought when he landed on this godforsaken planet. He floated with his legs crossed and a staff touching the floor, as if it was what was holding him up. Broly shook his head at the incredulity of what was happening. Who? What? How? The figure waved its hand, and the chains fell away from the Saiyan. Broly quickly shot to his feet in an aggressive stance. Explain yourself or die. Amusement passed through him once more. It felt like he was breathing the emotion that permeated the world of his mind so wholly. Leaving power like yours unsupervised is the gamble of a fool. The old man, him, whatever he was, stroked his own face. Though I did not anticipate this appearance of mine. The Saiyan wanted to blast the man into oblivion, but he felt a strange compulsion to just wait it out. It took but a moment for him to figure out that the old man was influencing him. The anger that resulted was enough. An orb of Kai shot forward only for it to fizzle out before it touched the pseudo-clone. We're in a cage in your mind, Saiyan. A cage of my design. Unlike our first meeting, you have no power against me. He waved his hand once more, and the two were back in the original forest where he landed. Broly's fists clenched as he looked around. It was a perfect replica or close enough to it that it didn't matter. He looked back at the one who imprisoned him and pointed an accusatory finger. Alright, you old bastard. The sage lifted a hand. Please, call me Hagoromo. Broly's aura exploded out. His fists ached to turn the thing in front of him to a pile of mush. The gall of it to ask for respect out of him. I'll call you Shitston if I want to for trapping me like you did. They stared at each other for a moment, one impassive, the other furious. Explain yourself. How are you here? It took a moment for Hagoromo to answer. He did expect this interrogation, but it would be hard to explain this whole situation to someone nearly wholly ignorant of chakra. I left a portion of my own chakra, my life force, within the seals on your body. Part of my consciousness now lies here within you. Unfortunately, your unique physiology has left me changed into this form you're witnessing. The Saiyan began to pace. This son of a bitch couldn't get enough of him in the real world, so he just decides to stick with him after death. What kind of bullshit was that? He looked up at the sky. He'd never, truly, seen the stars above this planet. They were so unfamiliar. He took a deep breath. He might as well get some answers if he was impotent. Why invade my mind? The sage, or rather his chakra, hesitated. It was my desire to repair your damaged psyche during your hibernation, and, to an extent, I did. You were left feral by your confrontation with a being known as Kakarot, so I did what was within my ability. Hagoromo had a small smile on his face. If I'm allowed a moment of pride, seeing you as you are now is an accomplishment. That name, that hated name, brought Broly's eyes back to the construct of chakra. Unbidden memories were suddenly brought forth, and the Saiyan closed his eyes. There was only what he believed he should feel and a slight rise in his heart rate. None of the blindness and tunnel vision that normally came. You know about Kakarot. When you repair a mind as fractured as yours, the cause of said fractures has to be known. The circumstances regarding your birth were tragic. The pseudo-clone's hand tightened around his shakujo. The evils that the Saiyans committed against a mere infant were horrific, even if their fear was warranted. Your mind, in order to cope with both your power and your trauma, latched onto the memories of, and subsequently developed hate for, Kakarot crying in order to maintain some semblance of sanity. I am truly sorry that you were born with so little chance to be good. The Saiyan's fists tightened once more, his brows furrowed, and his mouth became a snarl. I don't want your pity. He spat out between grit teeth. The sage nodded in understanding. Don't mistake my sympathy for your plight as pity, Saiyan. I respect your pride more than that. At least someone does. Broly thought as he became calm once more. It was surprisingly easy to do so, but this time he couldn't pin the blame between the sage's influence or his repaired mind. Of course, this entire discussion begged the question as to why he would show himself now. The sage gave him a knowing look as if reading his mind. I had hope when your release finally came, I as well as my descendant would aid in your recovery, but that is not the case. The inheritor of my eyes wishes to use you to bring ruin to this world. Broly crossed his arms and shrugged off his concern. Like he gave a shit what happened to this construct's plans. So you can't play therapist now, my heart bleeds for you really, but what does that mean for me? Are you going to put me back in the hole so someone else can play with my mind? No, nothing of the sort. The world shifted and Broly found himself stand across the sage with a table on the floor between them. Hagoromo kneeled on a mat in gesture for the Saiyan to do the same. The ancient warrior growled but complied. Anything to get this old fool to leave him alone sooner. The pseudo-clone poured an imaginary cup of tea for him. I just wished to have a talk. How could he have been so stupid? The answer had been staring him in the face this entire time. It was the Rinnegan by which Broly was brought down to the level of mere mortals. It had to be by the Rinnegan with which he would be truly and absolutely driven by his will alone. Nagato will have to relinquish his eyes to him. A bit earlier than planned, but not an altogether unwanted change. Madara thought as the Kamui took him from the sage's tablets and brought him to a large underground pool. Within the water were thousands of pale, white bodies with green hair. Zetsu was merely the original, and with the Jito statue and Hashirama's DNA, more Zetsus were able to be created. With how things were going, he wouldn't be surprised if a war was needed to complete his plan to cast an infinite Tsukuyomi over the world. Despite the Saiyan's unique properties, such a conflict could not be a guaranteed win with just one man. But it was not the exact copies of Zetsu that he was particularly concerned about. He walked along the surface of the pool to the center. Below him were a dozen Zetsu still partway through development. They were larger than the other clones, though not considerably so. What was of interest were the tails with green fur that floated among the ones that were further along. This batch was stable, it seemed. Not a single one dead or deformed so far. Madara could not be more pleased. The end was near and, despite some setbacks, things were coming together. So, roughly speaking, we're about a third of the way through the story. Still a long ways to go, but it's a journey worth taking. A talk with the man responsible for the mess he was in. He'd rather blow himself up, but he wanted answers. Hell, it was clear that the old bastard was a bleeding heart. He could convince him to. Release you? His purple-eyed clone asked as he sipped from his tea. You'll have to be very persuasive to convince me to do that. His mouth fell open before Broly slammed it shut to grit his teeth. Of course, they were in his mind. His thoughts were probably laid bare here. Excellent guess. Hagoromo smiled at the Saiyan. In here, you come as you are. No deceptions, no hidden motives, nothing of the sort. His smile shifted to a smirk. To me, at least. The sage gestured at the tea in front of Broly, which he ignored. Of course, he wasn't afforded that privilege. It's not like everyone that used him kept their motives secret. I understand your apprehension regarding this arrangement of ours, but this is your mind, Broly. Not mine. Were it reversed, you'd know me as I am. He laid his hands down on his thighs. Now, this is a rather one-sided discussion so far, don't you think? Broly growled. He already hated everything about this. You said you wanted to talk. So talk. The pseudo-clone took a moment to respond as if hesitant. He'd better have a good explanation. When I sealed your power and your mind as I did, the intention was to aid in your journey to heal once you were released. The sage sighed, his breath weighed down with guilt. But plans never turn out as you wish, do they? My seals had to be extensively modified to function with your alien power. It's why my appearance was so late. The remorse Hagoromo showed made the Saiyan want to strangle him. He screwed with something he didn't understand and had the gall to feel bad when shit hit the fan. It disgusted him. So you're feeling guilty because you weren't on time, the Saiyan slammed his fist into the wooden floor. It remained unharmed. You fucked me when you thought any of this was a good idea. Broly was on his feet screaming at the sage now. Self-restraint was never a good point of his, but what little he had flew out the window as everything that happened to him since he landed on this forsaken planet replayed in his head. Why is this at all important anyways? Knowing why you screwed me doesn't help. Hagoromo let the invective flow over him with no protest. The man in front of him was justified in his anger for his failures. The seal on his head was only meant to allow them to speak, but it evolved to have a primitive chakra system. Instead of helping him, it has merely facilitated Madara's plans. I am sorry, Broly. I never meant for any of this to happen. The Saiyan knew he couldn't harm the construct in front of him, but that left no avenue for his rage. He just wanted to break something. To lose himself in some violence, to forget about what had happened for just a moment. But he couldn't. He couldn't do a damn thing. He moved and put his hand to the wall. It was made of some paper-like substance divided up by wood. He ripped a hole in it only to be met with the void that normally surrounded him. An artificial breeze rolled across. I don't want an apology, I want out. The void changed to a vividly green meadow with a brilliant night sky full of stars. It didn't matter, he knew it was an illusion. The sage stepped beside him. Broly, there is another reason for this meeting. He wanted to be surprised, truly, but his anger burned out into apathy. He had been angry for weeks now and he was emotionally exhausted. Madara needs to be stopped. The sage turned to him. His expression was far more severe than it had been up to this point. He could actually see why someone would consider the old man a threat. I may not know what his end goal may be, but the abuse of your power tells me all I need. Hagoromo looked upwards in a vague direction. The shinobi out there are ultimately ignorant of his machinations, even as they react to the agonies he inflicts. Broly scoffed. If you spent as much time in my head as you say you did, then you'd know that appealing to my morality is a poor argument. Tell me, Broly, how did it feel to lose against Kakarot? The Saiyan had the front of the sage's robes in his hands in an instant, the anger he had thought merely embers reignited. His eyes glowed with barely restrained power. The killing intent rolling off the man would have slain a more feeble being. Hagoromo remained unfazed. He knew that this wound was a painful one, but they needed to have this discussion. The world was at risk if things continued as they did. I don't care how much power you have here, do not speak to me like that. The sage raised his hands in a pacifistic gesture, the sight looking odd given the mirror image he occupied. I did not mean to offend, Broly. It was mere curiosity. It felt like shit. The Saiyan dropped him before he walked through the wall and sat at the edge of the deck he stood on. It should have felt nice to be outside like this. At peace. What other answer could you've possibly expected? Then let me be more specific. What went through your mind in that moment? His anger diminished as an invisible blanket seemingly fell on him. He knew it was his copy's influence, but it was something to care about later. He wanted answers. He'll get them. Maybe then, the old bastard will know exactly how pointless this all was. I was the strongest in the universe. He started. The sage stood behind his right side and listened intently. Hagoromo knew much about the Saiyan through the exploration of his memories, but hearing how the man himself interpreted his experiences would be valuable in helping him. Planets crumbled under me when I demanded it. Stars died with a wave of my hand. That changed when I reached maturity. Broly rubbed his forehead as the phantom feeling of a metallic weight settled on his forehead. My father forced a crown on my head when I was sleeping, and it stole me from my body. I couldn't think clearly. I was numb to everything. I stared at walls for hours. It was hell and I didn't know it. The Saiyan paused and Hagoromo allowed the moment. The man's resistance to his influence diminished as he was seemingly lost in his memories. The sage battled with himself regarding the ethics of this course of action. Was subverting someone's free will morally right when it came to ensuring peace? It was a question that he still had no proper answer, even as he did such a thing. He had no intention of forcing Broly to do anything, not that he had the power to do so anyways. In the end, whatever the alien did was his decision. Hagoromo was merely a passenger, but Broly needed to speak, to let him know. And, suddenly, I was free. The raven-haired man looked at the construct of chakra in his eyes. You know what freed me? My power. It just needed the right trigger and it exploded. It wasn't some kind-hearted fool or my father turning over a new leaf. It was me. The scene of his escape flashed before his eyes. The power that coursed through him threatened to consume him, but the euphoria of release kept him there in that second. It was a high like nothing else. In that moment, I knew my power was the only thing I could rely on and that no one would ever come to help me. He saw Kakarot beaten, bloodied, and stuck in the wall. He had only toyed with the man and his friends, and his enjoyment was now waning. He lazily tossed another fist only to have it stopped in place. The explosion of gold that followed brought him back into reality. What fucking happens not an hour after I'm free? I'm nearly killed in a single blow by Kakarot. When I laid on the surface of that doomed planet, I could only think of how powerless I was to stop him, how stupid I was to toy with him and his friends, and how I had my life stripped from me as soon as I had it back. He remembered crawling to his pod. It was pathetic, but he didn't know what would happen if he just died. That unknown left him shaken, left him cold. That's what pushed him along despite the agony that he had felt. Broly shivered. I felt weak. The environment transformed around them. A ruined city replaced their peaceful dwelling. An orange sky reigned above with cylindrical skyscrapers reaching out like the hands of dying men. The Saiyan recalled this place. It was the last planet he purged before his father gained control of him. Bodies littered the streets. All looked like they had been crawling before they died. That was different. Have you ever thought that your countless victims have felt similar when you murdered them? Hagoromo, now beside him, crouched to look at the corpse at his feet. It looked like a woman. She had violet skin with emerald splotches along her disproportionately long arms. Blue hair, more solid and less numerous than a human's, flowed over her head. How hopeless they must have been in their final breaths against might such as yours. Broly scowled at the transparent attempt to guilt-trip him. Why do they matter? If they can't defend themselves, they deserve what happened. Simple as that. Who taught you that? My father. The sage crossed his legs and sat in the air, oddly eager to follow the philosophy of the man who betrayed you. Broly grunted in response rather than give a proper answer. He didn't need to justify himself, least of all to the old bastard. Just because his father was an asshole didn't mean everything he said was invalid. Would you say you deserved what happened to you? The raven-haired man gave Hagoromo an indignant look. What kind of question was that? Of course not. The sage pointed at the corpses around them with his shakujo. Then why did they? Because they're not me. Hagoromo could not stop the disappointment he felt at those 4 words. The anger and bitterness he could feel was too reminiscent of his son, Indra. He had failed to convince his own son that it was through compassion and understanding that the world would know true peace, not through power like he believed. His grip tightened imperceptive on his shakujo. He would not fail Broly. The Saiyan continued, unaware of the sage. I am the legendary Super Saiyan. I meant to be a god, something unstoppable. The world should have looked up to the sky and seen their end. He leveled a hateful glare to the sage. Instead, I'm stuck here because of you. Hagoromo sensed the approach of someone in the real world. It felt like the woman. It seems our time is up. The sage tapped his shakujo on the floor and the world started falling away. Before I go, I want you to know, Broly. The only thing that separated you from your victims was your power. Were the threads of fate different, you would have been in their place. Think on that. Broly's vision became unfocused and he felt himself being pulled. His pseudo-clone looked up at the void, swallowed him. I can sense she's more compassionate than her associates. If you speak with her, bond with her, she might help you escape Madara's clutches. Broly scowled at the wall of stone he faced. What a waste of time. The bastard didn't even have the courtesy to just leave him in that fake world he created. At least that was a change of pace. He idly noted that the wall was actually a ceiling and so sat up. A sore pain answered him and he looked down. Large red patches of swollen blisters still marked him. His skin still burned from the fight with that giant red monster. Whatever it was made of, it was nasty. Other than that, it seemed all his other injuries were healed. He can't have been out that long. You're awake. Broly turned to Conan. He wanted to say something snarky but couldn't be bothered. The talk with the sage disturbed him more than it should have. He focused on the food in the woman's hands and his stomach promptly reminded him of his hunger. He stood up swiftly, ignored the way his skin screamed at him and stumbled over to the cell's entrance. He took the food from her and scarfed it down with the ferocity that his race was known for. Conan did little to hide her disgust at his lack of manners and would have left were it not for the grunt from the injured man that was clearly to get her attention. He swallowed the mouthful of gruel and wiped the remnants off his lips with the back of his hand. What happened? You were injured in your confrontation with the Kyuubi. She tilted her head towards his bed. You have been unconscious for some time now. The man closed his eyes in tired frustration. I meant, why is everything healed except for these burns? Understanding softened her eyes and gave his burns a once-over. They should have been permanently crippling given how long he was directly in contact with the tailed beast's chakra, but there he was standing. Had she not known Haiden, she'd say he was the closest thing to unkillable you could be. The Kyuubi's chakra is potent. Its lingering presence on your skin prevents us from healing those wounds. She almost sympathized with him. Chakra poisoning was an awful thing to experience, or so she's heard. You'll have to get better the old-fashioned way. Broly's forehead hit the bars. Of course. Several moments of silence passed as Aim's angel waited for the man to speak once more. Her gut told her there was more that he wanted to say. What's the deal with you? She raised a brow at that. An unusual question. Or unusually phrased. Excuse me? She asked with genuine curiosity. Despite the hostility of their last conversation, she was still held interest regarding the alien. You can't exactly learn about what was out there if you weren't on speaking terms with the only one who had that knowledge. Madara is clearly in charge. Guy with the purple eyes. Why could this Saiyan not see that her leader was worthy of respect? Lord Pain, you mean? She interrupted. Yeah, sure. He's clearly second in command despite his godhood. He gestured air quotes when he said the word. A piece of paper lashed out and cut into his arm. She made it a point to glare at him. He didn't skip a beat when he continued. So where do you fit in? I am a founding member of the Akatsuki. Right hand of Kami himself. This time, it was Broly's turn to raise a brow. You really believe he's a god? She thought on the question for a moment. She revered Nagato for his strength and what he's accomplished, but she didn't deify her friend as others did despite his eyes. She knew who he was behind his paths after all. When the people spoke of Nagato as a god, he embraced it and she supported him. She supported him no matter what, and, with the village worshipping them, their transition into the leadership was smooth if bloody, from the systematic killing of the previous leader Hanzo and anyone associated with the man. Of course. He made a thoughtful noise but didn't continue that line of conversation. It was clear he was skeptical, but that mattered not to her. What mattered was the village and Nagato. It's why she had been pushing him towards getting rid of Madara while they could. She knew whatever he was planning would end in hers and, more importantly, Nagato's death. Does it ever stop raining? Conan was surprised by the question as it wasn't expected. She looked out at the rain that constantly washed over the village. Some found it comforting, others found it depressing. For Aim's angel, it was how she knew she was home. Only when Lord Pain commands it. She glanced at the Saiyan. Ever since their first discussion, the raven-haired man ignored her presence save when she brought his food. What changed? You are rather talkative today. Broly pressed his lips together in thought. The old man said that she could help him if he spoke with her, but he couldn't just tell her that. He'll just tell part of the truth. Not any more than last time we did, I think, but to answer the question there's nothing here. I've always had my father whenever I wanted to talk. Before the whole crown debacle left him effectively mute for who knows how long and also ruined any goodwill he had towards the man. It's boring. She didn't fully believe him, but it was an understandable feeling to have as a prisoner. And you expect me to entertain you? He rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure, that's exactly what I meant. Conan narrowed her eyes at the blatant sarcasm. She wanted to just leave him there, but if he wanted to talk, it'd be easy enough to satisfy a number of her curiosities. Perhaps she could convince him to let her know if Madara planned anything. She doubted he held any loyalty to the man after all. My apologies, I shouldn't have assumed like that. She took the empty bowl from his hands. She felt a presence suddenly appear near Pain's diva path. Madara. Unfortunately, I do not have time to talk. Her body broke apart into hundreds of sheets of paper and left through balcony. Maybe another time. That didn't go as planned, but it was a start. Broly was about to go take a nap when his masked oppressor appeared in the front of his cell. Madara glanced at the rain outside for a few long moments before he turned to the Saiyan. It's time for a test, Broly. So Broly has been given an incentive to potentially change. Will he do it? Who knows? Moments before. Madara appeared where he believed Pain's diva path would be. As expected, he was looking over the other paths. God's equivalent for a shinobi maintaining their weapons. The sage's tablet made a point of just how much of the Saiyan strength he could lock away. At most, with the suppressing seal on his back, he could be allowed access to 1% of his base power. Any more would require the removal of the seal. The god of shinobi was very particular with his words, as it was also mentioned that Broly had 2 transformations that theoretically increased his power dramatically, but that was for the future. With his full strength, the Saiyan could tear asunder worlds. They had stayed away from releasing Broly's full capacity under the seal because of the risk involved. Perhaps the power could shatter the seal if left for too long, or Madara's genjutsu might stop working. The aversion to risk only left him with his carefully put together organization in ruins and the strongest tailed beast still out of their hands. Perhaps risk could fix that. Pain turned unfazed by his sudden presence. Granted, the walking corpse could be shocked beyond compare and it'd probably look the same. How Conan read him so easily, he couldn't be bothered to learn. Is there an issue, Lord Ma? We're releasing Broly's power. His lone, exposed eye narrowed. All of it. The path took a step back as if the Uchiha just slapped him in the face. You know the dangers involved in such action. Let me worry about it. You just do it. Madara cameoed away and left behind a startled Pain. Had the man gone mad? There's no telling what would happen if they just turned the lever to that extreme. The Akatsuki figurehead turned back to his paths. The masked Uchiha would get them all killed. Pain's Rinnegan blew for a moment. His plan to invade Konoha for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki would have to be delayed. Madara had to go. Naruto felt himself blowed up and fear shot through his system. He could feel the webbing develop between his fingers and his cheeks fatten. Before it could get any farther however, he received a sharp blow to the head from Fukasaku's stick. The blonde promptly fell to the floor as his clones popped. He put his hands to the back of his head and rolled around cursing the toad. Jiraiya, who at this point had been meditating to further perfect his own sage mode, opened an eye at the Jinchuriki currently writhing on the floor. He couldn't help his chuckle at the expense of his godson. Hinata's eyes shot open at the sound and she looked down at Naruto in worry. She thought he had it that time. She let go of the natural energy before any of the detrimental effects could take hold. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly depending on your perspective, she had been progressing faster than her crush through her more disciplined nature and the use of her Byakugan to support her much better chakra control as well. You have to hit him so hard. The elderly toad put the cane on his shoulder as he waved off the girl's concern. Pa, of course I do. Don't want to take any chances with natural energy, you know. The Hyuga shivered as a breeze passed over her. She still hadn't progressed past the use of oil, but Fukasaku said that she wasn't far off unlike Naruto. Frankly, she still couldn't believe she was here. She felt like she was intruding on sacred ground, that she was unworthy of being a sage. The elder toad couple were reluctant to take her on, especially with Jiraiya's initial protests to her participation. It brought her so much joy to see Naruto argue so hard for her, to believe in her, even when she objectively had no business being here. Jiraiya even made it a point that her chakra reserves were too small for sage training anyways, but here she was. Apparently, it wasn't a hard rule, just a precaution that made it less likely for her to turn into a toad. It just seems a bit much. You want him to turn into a toad? Oh, of course not. Then this is how it has to be. Naruto picked himself up and sat next to her while grumbling about grouchy toads. He glanced at her and gave her a smile that made her heart flutter. She should be more concerned about the blonde's seeming dependency on her since the failed retrieval mission, but she was only human and she loved having his attention for once. Even with her Byakugan inactive, she could see him struggling to not look down. That made her blush heavily when they first arrived and were introduced to the oil. It explained why the Sannin told them to bring swimwear. It did wonders for her stutter. Spend enough time someone with minimal clothing and the nerves tend to settle apparently. How you holdin' up? She blinked at the question. She had been too in her thoughts. Oh, I'm doing fine, I think. Hinata closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew she had this. I just have to give me a moment. She activated her Byakugan once more to keep an eye on her chakra. The natural energy circulated around her as she begun to take it in. It threatened to flood her system, but she held it in check well enough. Whoa. She opened her eyes, now with toad-like pupils, and glanced at her crush. What? He gave her a wide grin with a tinge of wonder in his eyes. You look so cool. Hinata blushed at the praise before she looked into the pool of oil to see her reflection. Unbeknownst to her, violet markings had appeared around her eyes when she entered Sage mode. A band seemingly wrapped across her face with fang-like markings flowing down about midway through each cheek. It was pretty out there, but it was cool. Bukasaku hopped to her side with a gobsmacked expression on his face when he was that the Hyuga had already entered Sage mode. Then again, she had the perfect foundation save for a lack of chakra. He regained his composure quickly enough and put a hand to her shoulder. How do you feel? Hinata turned to the Toad Elder before she looked down at her hands and clenched them. She hadn't noticed, but her Byakugan had become sharper. She could see individual cells in her skin if she focused. The entirety of Mount Mamboku was visible to her and something told her that was just the tip of the iceberg. Strong. Naruto punched his palm. Now I've got to try even harder. He put his hands into his signature seal. I can't let you be the first one to finish training, Hinata. The blonde created several clones who proceeded to lather themselves in the oil before they went back to meditation. Jiraiya took this moment to get the young woman's attention with a wave of his hand. She took a moment to release the natural energy within her. While he does that, I need to talk with you, Hinata. You better not do anything, pervy sage. The vein popped out on the Sannin's forehead. What do you take me for, you runt? Jiraiya glanced at the young woman and gave her a smirk. Besides, I doubt you'd appreciate it if I moved in on your girlfriend like that. What? She's not my ow. Bukasaku put the cane back on his shoulder as the clones disappeared once more. Focus. The smirk faded as the older shinobi gestured with a nod of his head to move away from the blonde. He knew that the brat would have problems becoming a sage. It wasn't an easy thing to learn, but he made little if any progress, and he had a suspicion as to why. He could feel the fox's influence whenever he entered sage mode himself and studied his godson during training. Still, he wanted confirmation. Have you looked at Naruto's chakra pathways when he meditates? Notice anything weird? He asked Hinata once they came to a stop. She was surprised by the sudden question but nodded nonetheless. The Kyuubi's chakra spreads whenever natural energy enters him. The Sannin scowled and her heart began to race. Was there something wrong? I suspected as much. Is Naruto in danger, sensei? DCH, I told you to just call me Jiraiya. His visage softened at the concern and fear on the young woman's face. And, maybe. I have reason to believe the fox is interfering with Naruto's training. Why would the Nine Tails hamper Naruto like that? He rubbed his chin and thought. If I had to hazard a guess, it might be trying to keep him weak, so he'll have to rely on its power and make it easier for the fox to either corrupt him or break the seal. The Hyuga had an almost confident look on her face. It'll have to break the seal. He raised a brow. What made her so sure? Oh. She nodded fervently. Naruto won't fall to the fox. He's too strong for that. For what felt like the millionth time, Naruto failed to hold on to the natural energy. The damn fox's chakra wouldn't let him keep it. He opened his eyes to the view of a dank, dirty sewer. The Kyuubi's prison. He turned around at the feeling of a presence behind him. You are having trouble with your sage training. It wasn't a question from the fox, it was a statement of fact. Naruto looked up to meet the crimson eyes of the Nine Tails. The blonde had an inkling that the tailed beast was purposefully obscuring its face, so he could only see its eyes. You would know, you're in my body after all. The sewer around him rumbled with a thoughtful groan from the eldritch chakra construct. My presence within you interferes with your ability to balance the natural energy in your system. The Kyuubi turned and began to pace its prison. Each step was an earthquake. It looked at him again. "Come here, boy." Naruto hesitated. He wasn't the smartest guy around, but he knew walking into a cage held a beast with claws the size of him was not a good idea. There's also the multitude of times that the fox openly threatened him throughout his life. The Nine Tails noticed. "I will not harm you." "That isn't what I'm worried about." He lied. He didn't want to offend the fox. It rolled its eyes but dropped the matter as it sat on its haunches. Despite the seemingly peaceful attitude it had at the moment, the fox remained endlessly menacing. "You need my help to become a sage. It is only through my power freely given will balance be achieved." The blonde narrowed his eyes. He's always been told that the Nine Tails was a purely malevolent creature. It was also a fox, a creature known for its cunning. What was it trying to do? "What do you get out of this?" It tilted its head as if questioning his intelligence. It moved its paw in a sweeping gesture to the sewer where it resided. "Behold my home." The way the fox referred to its prison was almost sarcastic but not quite there. It was too down to be sarcastic. The Nine Tails lowered itself to his level, and the rumble of its throat made the ground quake. "There is no light here, it is the deep of the ocean in which I drift, in which I shall drown." The crimson fog spewed from the fox's mouth and surrounded Naruto. He instinctively protected his face from the strange substance, but dropped it after a few seconds in which nothing happened. "Accept my power so that I may feel the sun once more." It was being purposefully vague. He sympathized with the fox. He knew what it was like to be isolated, though this was another level to what he experienced, and it wasn't like the fox was innocent of its punishment, it did try to destroy the Konoha. "I've been meaning to ask about that." The blonde scratched the back of his head. "I already have access to your chakra, what does accepting your power even mean?" "A mere fraction of my power tarnished is what you possess. It is to compare a polluted pond to a crystalline sea." The nine-tailed fox scowled as its container seemed unconvinced. It didn't matter. The time will come and he will succumb. "Every second you waste hesitating, child, another victim falls to the Akatsuki. How would you feel if you failed to save your friends because you lack the strength necessary?" The Kyuubi's word struck a chord with its container as fear widened his eyes. It had to keep twisting the knife. As long as the wounds never heal, it would have an out with the child. It slammed a paw and the force of impact blew the brat to his back. "I grow tired," it said as it circled around a particular spot several times before laying down. "Leave me." The masked shinobi looked to the balcony with a questioning eye. There was a lingering presence here. He spotted a lone piece of paper, about a centimeter in length, floating about in the rain. Conan was just here. Nothing to worry about at the moment. He looked to the Saiyan. It amused him to see how quickly his face shifted from apathy to irritation. "It's time for a test, Broly. It's time for you to fuck-o." The Uchiha smirked beneath his mask as the alien stood rigid when his genjutsu took over once more. It was almost admirable how much fight the Saiyans still had. Most lost their will by this point. He grabbed onto his slave, and the two were back with Pain once more. He gestured for the Rinnegan wielder to release Broly's power. Pain hesitated. "This is folly, Madara." The sage warned against releasing so much of his strength. The Uchiha's glare cut through him. "Do you not wish for peace, Pain?" The Akatsuki figurehead was taken aback by the question. "Of course. You have not doubted me until this point, why do you stand in your own way now?" Pain leveled a steely gaze at the Saiyan. This was the weapon he wanted. The swift blade that would cow the shinobi world into peace, but it wasn't under his guiding hand. It was clear with the continued gathering of the tailed beasts in spite of Broly, Madara's goals did not align with his. "The peace I seek is not that of a grave. Were he to break these see. He won't. Now do as you're told." He knew he couldn't fight Madara, not now, not without a plan. The Uchiha was a legend and for good reason. If they survived increasing Broly's power, he would need to speak with Conan. Pain put his hand on the suppression seal on the Saiyan's back. With little ceremony, he released the floodgates. For a brief moment, the glow of the seal shifted from gold to the green that had become Broly's signature. The Diva Pass hand burned instantly as the full brunt of the power he was able to release hit him. Winds whipped at the room with forces that the storm outside couldn't help to match. A poisonous flame surrounded Broly and the roof above their heads cracked and crumbled from the heat that rushed out of the Saiyan. Not a single raindrop entered the room in spite of the hole in the ceiling. Broly's pupils disappeared as his hair stood on end and flashed a dark blue. Pain backed away as he felt his skin boil. It was like he plucked the sun from the sky and brought it to his village. The Saiyan's head moved with clear discomfort and his muscles contracted from the Kai, threatening to rip them apart. Madara weathered the crushing spectacle with little reaction. His Mangekyo spun as it struggled to comprehend what it was seeing. Kai was normally rather similar to chakra, but with how unstable and vast the warrior's reserves were, his Sharingan was barely more useful than a civilian's eyes when it came to soaking in the details of the energies assaulting the room. As sudden as it started, the violence ended. Broly's hair returned to its normal black coloration as he stood up and his aura calmed. It was clear he was still under the Jinjutsu. Madara gave the room a once-over. The place was ruined and the Diva path definitely needed fixing up from being so close. The torrential rain, unimpeded by Broly, fell through and soaked the brainwashed Saiyan. Just like that, our goals are ever closer. The masked man put a hand to Broly's shoulder and glanced at Pain. Any doubts will be laid to rest soon. He used Kamui once more and the two were on the fringe of Takigakure, the hidden waterfall village. It was a far cry from the great villages, but it had the privilege of once holding onto a tailed beast. Even without their Jinchuriki, the village had avoided ever being successfully invaded due to their skilled shinobi and their legendary hero water. However, with Madara perfectly capable of disposing and evading even their strongest ninja and no Jinchuriki, it was a perfect target for this particular task. Destroy this village. He turned to the Saiyan as his aura erupted around him. All at once. The ground cracked as the raven-haired man rocketed into the air above the village. The Uchiha noted with his lone Sharingan that some shinobi started moving. Ever since they had acquired the Seven Tails, the settlement had been on high alert. Not that it mattered. Everything for miles turned a sickly green as the air around became noticeably heavy. An orb as bright as the sun above shone where he last saw Broly. Madara idly noted that there was even a slight corrosiveness to the light that had engulfed the environment as the little skin he had exposed became irritated. The green rushed to Broly before his hand closed around the Kai he had gathered. Various jutsu and explosive kunai were launched at him, but nothing could blemish his skin, much less cause harm. The Saiyan waved his arm, and the emerald power he held raced towards the village below. The hair on the back of Madara's neck rose up in the instant before the attack connected with the massive tree that was the centerpiece of the village. His gut told him that he was not at a safe distance from the epicenter. He transported himself a good 50 miles away as Taki was erased in a moment's breath. It was a good thing he left when he did, as the dome of emerald annihilation easily reached past the cliff he had stood on seconds ago by his estimation. He had been fully prepared for devastation like this, and yet he still found himself speechless. It was hard to put into words how insignificant one feels in the presence of something like Broly. His whole species were just insects to this demon that had the misfortune of landing here. And just like insects, a sting was all it took to bring even the mightiest to their knees. He commuted back to Takigakure. The earth at the edges of the explosion was scorched beyond recognition. Closer to the epicenter, there was no long dirt and stone, just glass with Broly floating just above it. A whole village gone in the blink of an eye. He had to go bigger to see the extent of this power. As Madara grabbed onto the Saiyan once more, he noticed the gleam of sweat on the warrior's brow and he was on unsteady legs. His breaths were deeper and slower as well. He was tired. The chakra poisoning on his skin must have impacted the man more than he accounted for. He'll have to let the Saiyan heal before the next step. It was always something with the Saiyan. It didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but it was a minor bump in the road after many potholes had left him annoyed. The two left with nothing but silence in their wake. A few hours later, a caravan of hurried shinobi approached the village. They had seen the explosion of green from a half-day's travel away and pushed themselves to reach their village as soon as possible. They stood on the edges of the crater that used to be their village in horror. A man in with long brown hair and a yellow kimono jacket and gray pants walked ahead them for a few steps before falling to his knees. Shibuki had only been gone for a week. He had been too stressed lately and took a small vacation. He left the village in perfectly capable hands. As his eyes watered, the village had noticed how the moon's light reflected off the remains. It looked like glass. My lord, what should we do? He wiped his eyes. This wasn't the time for mourning. His men most certainly lost loved ones too, and they were holding themselves together better than stood and held himself with the composure expected of a leader in crisis. Their closest ally was Konoha. Contact the Hidden Leaf. We need to find whoever did this and stop them before they do it again. There's so much stuff going on. Madara and Pain look to be revving up for a fight, Hinata and Naruto are training for Sage Mode, and a hidden village has been wiped out. Broly was dropped off who knows how many days before, after Madara used him to annihilate an entire settlement. Given the increase in scope, he idly wondered if the masked man was slowly losing composure. He had no real place to judge there, but he was going to because fuck that guy. It felt good to have some more of his power back in his body, even if it was only temporary, and it left him exhausted. It reminded him of when he first fought Kakarot and his father's crown tried to keep him back. He closed his eyes. That wasn't a good memory, why was he remembering it? He shook it away. He rolled over onto his side with a quiet groan. The burns on his skin were pretty much gone, but a lingering soreness still remained. Conan should be coming not too long from now. Her brief visits each day were a welcome reprieve from the utter boredom that was his existence when Madara didn't have need of him. The sage was full of it, but talking with a woman was a good idea. It was only in those few minutes that he felt on equal standing with someone even if the bars told him otherwise. Being superior was the best option, but he'd take what he could get these days. It helped that she got him bigger portions too. That was nice. Someone knocked on the bars of his cell. He would have had some choice words for whoever bothered him with the loud ringing, but the sight of blue hair kept him in check. What the hell was with these guys and not making any noise to warn him? The smell of the gruel hit him quick enough and his stomach forced him to his feet. "Don't you have some minions to do this for you?" he asked as he took the bowl from her. She tried to get him to eat with these little things called chopsticks, but they were a pain to use, so he stopped. His hands were good enough to eat with. There was a subtle raise of a brow. "Is my company offensive to you?" Broly stopped mid-chew with his cheeks almost swollen with food. What kind of question was that? It's not like he ever gave the impression that that was the circa no he had now that he thought about it. Plenty of times actually. His response came out as a muffle. "No. If our enemies know you're not a willing participant in Akatsuki, they might try to break you out of our control. Your imprisonment is a secret to all but us." The Saiyan ate another bite with a simple grunt as a response. There was hope for him yet with that blonde brat if the possibility worried his captors. He didn't want to hope, for he had only seen it in the week as he crushed them, but he couldn't think of a better word for it. That'd be a real shame. The sarcasm was purposefully thick and, while he didn't witness it, he could feel her sour from his comment. Or maybe he was completely wrong and she was utterly unaffected. He couldn't tell. The silence fell between them as he continued to eat. He tried to come up with something else to say to break it. He was sick of how much he had to endure already. He glanced at the woman. She was weirdly compassionate compared to the rest of them. That's something to ask her about. "I remember you saying you were a founding member of Akatsuki. How did that happen? You seem too nice." That wasn't the word he wanted to use, but it was the best he could think of. She looked put off by the questioner, so he assumed given the pause that followed his question. "I don't believe nice is a good description." Broly shrugged it off as he dug into his meal once more. "It's the only one I got." The Angel of Aim looked down in mild disgust at the display. Her attempts at teaching him how to use chopsticks ended in abject failure it seemed. Moving on from the disappointing thought, Conan thought on the Saiyan's question. The reasoning for their creation would not help him escape, nor would it aid any enemies. Was his curiosity just what it was on the surface? While it was easy to think it was that simple, nothing ever was even with a man as simple as Broly. "Why do you wish to know?" He finished off his meal with a quick swallow before he answered. "No real reason I can give you. I just want to know." He was waving off her question, but the inflections in his voice were odd. He might have fooled a civilian but no one else. The true reason made him uncomfortable. In the brief amount of time she had known the man, Conan determined that he had tells for his lies just like any other human. It brought up the question of if their races were somehow related, but there was little time to dwell on such matters these days. "I can tell you're lying." His lips turned up into a not quite amused smirk. Heh. He pushed off the bars and stood straight. His form towered over her as he crossed his arms. "It's nothing serious, the longer you're here, the less time I spend just staring at walls. Asking a question like that might keep this conversation going. Simple as that." That was the truth, but there was more to it than that. The discomfort was there but not as apparent. In the end, she let it go. It's not like the information he wanted was classified or dangerous. Aim is in the center of several other great villages. She started, her voice made it clear that this was a practiced explanation. However, Conan made sure that the words carried the proper gravitas as it was why everything was the way it was. Their wars were unending and would spill over here to kill thousands of our people. I, along with others, formed the Akatsuki to put an end to such atrocities and ensure peace in our village. That wasn't enough as the great villages continue. The Saiyan interrupted her with a shake of his head. That gave her pause. "I didn't ask how your little group was formed. I asked how did you become a founding member." He was curious about her. Why on earth would that be the case? It was a question that needed asking, but it was clear that Broly wouldn't say why. Whether it was out of pride or some ulterior motive mattered little given who they were, who she was. Shutting this line of talk down would be the easiest thing to do, but a little voice in the back of her head told her that she could use this to learn more about the man. "That is rather personal," she said in a mutter. "It's not something to tell just anyone." It was out of place for her to act like this, but if she outright demanded an exchange, he might shut it down out of a need for control. He had to believe it was his idea. Of course it would be. Broly grabbed the bars and moved closer. "Tell you what, you tell me and you can ask me anything in return." While she wasn't one to use the word, bingo was a good way to describe how she felt about her success. She let the silence reign for several seconds to appear as if considering the option. Her reasons for joining the Akatsuki were personal, but it did not kill her to explain. She had been tempered and strengthened by the horrors of her childhood, and the Angel of Aim now saw it as a lesson to pass on. Perhaps she might even win the Saiyan to their cause, though she didn't hold her breath for that. Conan checked her surroundings for any unwanted ears, and she found none. Anything? He nodded. I accept your offer, Broly. His smile was smug, but she had an inkling that it wouldn't be once it was his turn to reciprocate. Her memories drudged themselves up as she put the story together. It's been years since she has last told it. When I was a child, her voice was quiet and slow this time. The rain outside seemed to come down harder. I was left orphaned when my family was killed in the Second Shinobi World War. Soon after, I met two boys, Yahiko and Nagato, and in time we became best friends. The Saiyan stopped her with a raise of his hand. Wait, Nagato. Pain is your best friend. She dropped the stoicism for a moment and looked at him with open confusion. Only she and Madara knew the man's real name. How did you know that? His head tilted as if making a note of what he witnessed. Conan cursed her lapse in judgment. Any ground ceded was too much. Madara referred to him by that the first time we met. I don't think he knows I know. His indifference was made plain with a shallow shrug. Or he doesn't care. Doesn't really matter now, does it? The Angel of Aim nodded as she returned to her line of thought with little hesitation. If she appeared nonplussed about the revelation, Broly might not consider the information of much importance. She wasn't one to leave a loose end like that around, but she couldn't exactly kill the man. It doesn't. She knew Nagato wouldn't be pleased by the idea of his true name being out there. The man thought himself reborn as Pain since Yahiko's death. In her wavering moments, the very idea was foolish to Aim's angel, but that helped Nagato cope. She couldn't criticize the man for Saiyan seemed satisfied with that and gestured for her to move on. One day, we came upon the legendary Sannin. Shinobi of immense skill and power. One suggested killing us, so we did not have to deal with the horrors of the war, but another decided that training us was a worthy pursuit. That conversation left her with a feeling of whiplash after it happened. To go from abject fear to hope from one sentence to the next. It did give her an idea of who Orochimaru was at the time. A cruel calculating man who she was ashamed to have ever given a place to in the Akatsuki. It was telling that the conflict was so damaging that killing us was seen as a mercy. From there, the Akatsuki was born. To answer your question more directly, I helped create the Akatsuki because I did not want to see anyone else suffer as I have. To live in a world where war is constant and death is preferred. Broly's lips twitched downward. As expected, almost disgustingly noble. He pushed off the bars and began to pace. Why try to help this world when it has only caused you suffering? Why not take your pound of flesh? As weak as you are, you can still do it. Because living to punish is not living at all. It is only when humanity has nothing to fear will we truly thrive. The Saiyan stopped pacing, but he did not appear convinced by her words. It was a shame, but she tried. She could only hope that, given time to think on it, he would come around to their point of view. She sensed a quick flare of chakra to her right and glanced over. It was Nagato's Diva Path. Conan, I wish to speak with you. Its eyes flicked over to Broly. The Saiyan had already laid down on his bed. In private. You asked for me, Nagato. Conan looked upon the sickly form of her longtime friend with concern. Well, it wasn't rare that he summoned her here, when he did it was always of importance. She couldn't help the feeling that crept up her back that this was a more grave occasion. The emaciated Reed glanced at her and nodded. Yes, I wish to speak about Madara. So her gut was right. What has he done? I believe our goals have shifted. He stopped for a moment as he thought on previous interactions. The Uchiha had always been suspicious, you couldn't not be when you shinobi of their rank and notoriety, but it was something he didn't take enough care to see beyond. Or perhaps they were never the same. He glanced at her stoic face. You don't seem surprised. She looked away from him. I suspected that he had ulterior motives for his involvement in our plans. I had stayed my tongue as he has been a boon to our organization. And because she would follow Nagato into certain death no matter what she believed. It was all she could do to help him. I guess I have been a fool blinded by my ambitions. He spoke with regret for things that have not occurred. He blamed himself for letting things progress so far. It was easy to read the man, which should be unsurprising given how long she'd known him. Ever since we acquired our weapon, he has been on a mission to master it, to make it his rather than ours. This is the weapon we wanted, but he continues in his obsession with the tailed beasts. I fear he will turn it on us in time when we are no longer useful to his plans. He straightened himself out. The action was clearly painful, but Conan saw that he felt the need to look powerful in both words and body. I have no doubt he would seek to steal my eyes as well. Her heart hammered at the implications of her friend's words. He wasn't saying that. Was he? Are you suggesting we kill Madara? Yes. One word spoken without hesitation, and they found themselves on the opposite side of one of the strongest shinobi in recorded history. She wasn't against the idea, but Reckless didn't even begin to describe such a course of action. She was only just understanding how his intangibility worked. Until they did, there'd be no way to harm him. There was also the big green elephant in the tower. He's already incredibly hard to fight. With Broly under his control, we'd stand no chance. The puppet is useless without strings. He will be no issue. Except that the puppet is far and away the most powerful being on the planet. She was fairly confident if Broly decided not to be touched, neither of them would get close enough. Nagato had to know that. You speak as if it's so simple. He nodded in response. It's not, but nothing we do ever is. You've studied his intangibility, have you not? She pursed her lips at that. She knew there was a time limit and that he couldn't use Kamui while intangible, but there were holes that needed filling in her theory. I'm not done, but there's enough there to exploit. Good. Once the time is right, we'll strike. Jiraiya thought himself dedicated to his village. Even when he spent years away, he maintained an intricate spy network to aid Konoha against potential. It was this dedication that forced him to follow every order and accept every mission no matter how heinous. Keeping Konoha safe was the most important thing to him. Enough so that he'd kill anyone up to and including Lady Tsunade herself if they proved traitorous. So when he denied the mission to go into AIM to gather information on the leader of the Akatsuki and possibly Broly, it was with great reluctance. When asked why, he only said one name. Naruto. He spoke to the blonde brat not long before about his difficulties with the training. Jiraiya took care to mention the fox's interference. Naruto said that the fox's presence won't allow him to enter Sage mode, as the tailed beast implied it wasn't doing it purposefully. A lie if he ever heard one, and he made sure to tell his godson as such. No, you don't understand, the Kyuubi has only helped me until now. Why would it hurt me now? Oh, maybe it was because it was a giant evil fox. An animal known for its cunning and trickery. The Toad Sage contemplated sealing the Kyuubi's chakra even more, but that would do far more harm than good, as that was a major source of power to deprive from the kid. The boy had suddenly attained Sage mode seemingly overnight. Something that would normally be cause for celebration was instead the cause of his anxiety. It was just another day of training. As expected, Hinata was progressing admirably without the oil. Naruto had been meditating for hours at this point. All of a sudden, like a bonfire being lit, a great burst of malevolence sprang from the Jinchuriki's body. Hinata almost fell off her board 100 feet in the air out of shock. He sprang forth into action ready to potentially fight the Kyuubi itself. The damn brat smiled at him with the telltale marks of orange around his eyes. His pupils were a fusion of the horizontal bars of Sage mode with the slits of when he was using the fox's chakra. The around him for several meters felt stale and lifeless. Hinata later revealed to him that the natural energy around the kid was being sucked into his chakra paths, like they were a vacuum. Wherever he stepped, the grass around him withered and died from the corruption seeping off him. Naruto looked without a worry in the world. Naruto, what did you do? He demanded of his godson. Minato-san looked at his hands coursing with power he had never felt before. I stopped hesitating. Odd, part 1 was hard as shit to write, but it's out of the way, thankfully enough. If this video gets 100 likes and 30 comments, I will upload part 2 very soon. And what you guys think about the story, let me know in the comment box. Let's see you guys in the next part.